Chapter 1961. In the residence of the Blue Dragon clan, in front of the treasure vault on the third floor, Ao Mingrue, the master of the Heavenly Palace, Ji Xing, is not only the leader of the Heavenly Alliance, but also the Destiny's child chosen by the heavens. His status is extremely honorable. How can a mixed-blood demonic beast like you meet him? Seeing Ao Mingrue by Dao Xian and Zhu Ningqian leave the treasure vault alone, Lan Zongwei, a third tribulation supreme expert of the Lan clan, who knew their background and status. This was because he knew very well that as long as he could successfully kill Ao Mingrue and the other two, the strength and morale of the Blue Dragon clan, White Tiger clan, and Vermilion Bird clan, who had lost their backbone, would be reduced by at least half. At that time, not only would they be able to easily complete the mission of annihilating the Guardian clans, but they would also be able to obtain the forgiveness of the three Annihilators, who would forgive their clan leader for taking the lead in questioning the Destiny's Child when the Heavenly Alliance was first established. More importantly, they would be able to obtain the rare treasures that the Blue Dragon clan had accumulated for countless years. Therefore, after rejecting Ao Mingrue's request to meet Ji Xing with obvious humiliating words, Lan Zongwei waved his hand at the 467 martial gods and half-tribulation supreme experts present and shouted, "Kill!" Regardless of whether it was the identity of a reclusive clan or the strength of a third tribulation supreme, Lan Zonghua could basically temporarily take the position of leader and issue orders without Ji Xing's presence. Therefore, after hearing Lan Zonghua's order to attack, more than 400 martial gods and half-tribulation supreme experts immediately joined forces to unleash their strongest attacks. Divine power, soul power, and occult laws, which had the power to destroy the world, surged toward Ao Mingrue and the other two. Damn it! In the face of the joint attack of more than 400 martial gods and half-tribulation supremes, even a supreme existence who had just entered the supremacy realm would find it difficult to withstand, let alone the three of them who were only at the peak of the third tribulation supremes. Therefore, after cursing silently, Ao Mingrue immediately led by Dao Xian and Zhu Ningqian back to the hall on the first floor of the treasure vault. Boom! After Ao Mingrue and the other two retreated to the first floor of the treasury, the attacks of over 400 martial gods and half-tribulation supremes landed on the defensive formation of the treasury. Even though the defensive formation around the Blue Dragon family's treasury had reached the level of a supreme being, after losing the Blood Void beast, the formation's power barely reached the level of a low-level supreme being. In other words, it was equivalent to someone who had just entered the Supreme Being realm. Thus, in the face of everyone's combined attacks, the defensive formation that had been erected for countless years began to crumble bit by bit, gradually revealing the green door that led to the first floor of the treasury. Everyone here knows that the Blue Dragon clan has existed since the ancient times when the Demon clan ruled the ancient continent. It is one of the few ancient clans in the profound Sky continent that can maintain a complete inheritance. Although everyone's combined attacks were causing the defensive formation of the treasury to crumble, Lan Zonghua was worried that Ao Mingrue and the other two had retreated to the treasury, as well as the hundreds of martial gods and half-tribulation supremes who had returned to the treasury earlier. They would take all the treasures in the treasury and escape using the means that they had prepared in advance. Therefore, Lan Zonghua had to think of a way to arouse the greed in everyone's hearts. Only then would they attack the defensive formation of the treasury with all their might. Countless years of bloodline inheritance, overlord status in the Middle Ages, Late Ages, and Modern Ages. How many amazing treasures have the Blue Dragon clan accumulated? Everyone can think carefully about it. After hearing Lan Zonghua's provocation, all the martial gods and half-tribulation supremes looked at the gradually emerging door of the treasury with naked greed in their eyes. Next, there was no need for Lan Zonghua to continue provoking them. None of the experts continued to hold back their strength. They all used their strongest means to speed up the speed of the defensive formation's collapse. On the first floor of the treasury, "Brother Mingrue, what should we do next?" Bai Daoxian asked worriedly when he saw that the defensive formation of the treasury could only hold on for a minute at most. In the face of Bai Daoxian's questioning, Ao Mingrue's eyes showed a painful struggle. However, when the door of the treasury was completely revealed and a few small cracks appeared, the struggle in his eyes was instantly replaced by determination. Daoxian, Ningqian, immediately carry out the second plan left by the ancestors. Temporarily give up the mountain range where the clan is located. Brother Mingrue, what about the divine meridians and innate crystals under the mountain range? Bai Daoxian was not surprised that Ao Mingrue had chosen the second plan left by the ancestors. However, he was quite reluctant to give up the dozen divine meridians that the Blue Dragon clan had painstakingly cultivated, as well as a large number of innate crystals that could be transformed into chaotic spiritual energy. Daoxian, as early as a month ago, old ancestor Ming he quietly returned to the family and took away all the primordial crystals under the mountain range, as well as 99 elite disciples with monstrous talent. Ao Mingrue, whose eyes flashed with admiration, quietly replied. However, when he thought of the dozen or so divine meridians that were related to the foundation of the mountain range and might eventually become the source of energy for that taboo existence to restore his strength, he felt a little reluctant and gloating at the same time. As for the dozen or so first-order divine meridians, let's just give them up. In any case, there are still more than 30 middle-grade and high-grade first-order divine meridians among the treasures that have been transferred to the treasury in advance. They can satisfy the cultivation needs of our guardian clans and can be used to restore the foundation of the mountain range. Okay. Seeing that Ao Mingrue had already considered everything in advance, Bai Daoxian did not remind him too much. After nodding and agreeing to carry out the second plan of temporarily evacuating the clan's residence, the three of them turned around and returned to the second floor of the treasury. Subsequently, they left the treasury and the mountain range where the Blue Dragon clan was located through the transportation formation in the corner of the hall on the second floor. Just as Ao Mingrue left the treasury with the members of the three guardian clans, the Blue Dragon, the White Tiger, and the Vermilion Bird, the experts of the Sky Alliance who had successfully destroyed the defense formation of the treasury rushed desperately into the first floor of the treasury. Although there were no treasures on the first floor of the treasury, as martial gods and half-tribulation supremes, they could still clearly capture the remnant aura of some treasures in the air. There are more than 400 guardian clans who have returned to the treasury. It's impossible for so many people to leave the treasury at the same time. Therefore, I'm guessing that the experts of the guardian clans are either on the second or third floor of the treasury. As an expert at the peak of the third tribulation supremes, apart from capturing the aura of a large number of treasures, Lan Zhongwei could also clearly sense the aura of hundreds of experts from the guardian clans. Chapter 1962. In the base of the Blue Dragon family, on the first level of the treasure house. Based on the time Ao Mingrue and the other two had left behind their auras, Lan Zhongwei knew that unless they used a large-scale teleportation formation, it would be impossible for so many people to leave the treasure house in such a short time. At the same time, considering that there were more than a dozen rank 1 divine ranges hidden under the mountain where the Blue Dragon family was located, he did not believe that Ao Mingrue would easily give up the base that had been passed down for countless years. Therefore, Lan Zhongwei gave a self-righteous reminder to everyone and directly gave an order. All experts who are proficient in formations, immediately find the passageway to the second level of the treasure house. Here. Just as Lan Zhongwei finished his order, a second tribulation sovereign expert had already discovered the teleportation formation in the corner of the hall. Hurry up and break the defensive formation, then find a way to activate the teleportation formation. Appearing in front of the teleportation formation in a flash, Lan Zhongwei only took a few glances before instructing a few experts who were formation emperors. Give us 2 minutes. After a careful inspection, an expert who was at the peak of the formation Emperor realm gave the time needed to break the defensive formation. Okay. 2 minutes. Presumably, the experts of the guardian families would not leave the treasure house, so Lan Zhongwei could accept the time needed to break the formation. Senior Zhongwei, if you want to activate the teleportation formation, you will need at least 3 lower rank 5 space crystals. After the reminder, the expert who was at the peak of the formation Emperor realm did not immediately break the defensive formation, but continued to remind him with a slight frown. You don't have to worry about the space crystals. You just need to break the defensive formation as soon as possible so that we can enter the second level of the treasure house as soon as possible. Lan Zhongwei gestured with his hand. Nodding his head, the expert who was at the peak of the formation Emperor realm and his other colleagues took action at the same time. In the end, they only spent 1 minute and 40 seconds to successfully break the defensive formation of the teleportation formation. Here. The moment the defensive formation was broken, Lan Zhongwei immediately took out 3 upper rank 5 space crystals and threw them to the expert who was at the peak of the formation Emperor realm. Activate. Without any hesitation, he pressed the space crystals into the teleportation formation and activated the formation by condensing a mark on the second level of the treasure house. Senior Zhongwei, it seems that Ao Mingrui and the others have completely destroyed the teleportation formation when they left. We can't use the teleportation formation to enter the 3rd floor of the treasury. Looking at the wreckage left behind by the collapse of countless teleportation arrays, the array formation pinnacle expert reminded with a solemn expression. Apart from using the teleportation formation, do you have any other way to enter the 3rd level of the treasury? Lan Zhongwei's face was as gloomy as water, and he suppressed his anger as he asked. Yes. After carefully glancing at the gloomy Huang Zonghua, the array emperor took a few steps back and pointed to the space barrier above his head. As long as we can break through the defense of the spatial barrier, we can also enter the 3rd floor of the treasury. Everyone, listen up. After hearing the solution provided by the array emperor, Lan Zhongwei continued to instruct with a gloomy face. Attack the spatial barrier on the 2nd floor of the treasury with all your might. Charge into the 3rd floor of the treasury as soon as possible. At the edge of the mountain range. Palace Master, do you think we should enter the Blue Dragon clan's encampment now? Ji Mingjun, the pinnacle 6th grade martial god expert from the Yushu Temple, had been using his divine thoughts to lock onto the martial gods and half-tribulation supremes who were attacking the defensive array of the Blue Dragon clan's encampment. When he saw that those experts had successfully broken through the defensive array of the encampment, his eyes revealed a hint of desire. When he saw that Lan Zhongwei had decisively rejected Ao Mingrui's request to meet the Alliance Master, the desire in his eyes was replaced by dissatisfaction. When he saw hundreds of martial gods and half-tribulation supremes rushing into the 1st floor of the treasury, the dissatisfaction in his eyes was replaced by greed and desire. He turned around and suggested to Ji Xing, no. After shaking his head and rejecting Ji Mingjuan's suggestion, Ji Xing turned his head and instructed another early-stage, 6th grade martial god expert beside him. Ancestor Xiang Rong, please secretly contact the experts of the Yushu Temple and the affiliated forces. Ask them to quietly return to the Yushu Temple without attracting the attention of other forces as much as possible and activate the defensive array of the Yushu Temple. Yes, Master. The martial god expert known as Ancestor Xiang Rong cupped his hands in response, then closed his eyes and used his divine sense to inform the Yushu Temple and the experts of the affiliated forces of the Yushu Temple. What is the meaning of this, Palace Master? Not only did he refuse to enter the encampment's treasury to plunder countless rare treasures, but he also refused to give up on the victory that was about to be in his hands. Ji Mingjun was very puzzled by Ji Xing's order just now. After glancing at Ji Mingjun with dissatisfaction, Ji Xing replied with a cold expression, This is an order from Tao Lord Scorching Sun. On the third floor of the treasury, the chaos marks were the foundation of becoming a Khanate supreme treasure, and at the same time, they were also rare treasures nurtured in the chaos. Using the innate divination technique of the Fushi 8 trigrams to calculate the whereabouts of the 29 chaos marks, the consumption of the technique's energy could be said to be terrifying. It was precisely because of this terrifying energy consumption that Yuhaoran was gradually escaping the danger of being devoured by the technique's backlash. At the same time, his frantic calculation of the chaos marks' whereabouts allowed him to gain a deeper understanding of the Fushi 8 trigrams. In the end, he successfully ascended to the realm of a technique emperor just before the energies of the same origin completely disappeared. The moment he ascended to Technique Emperor, not only did he successfully deduce the exact location of the 12 chaos marks, but he also found a way to seal the other 2 energies left behind by the Technique God Powerhouse. At the same time, he also used his breakthrough to the realm of a Technique Emperor to see a scene of the future. Slowly opening his eyes, Yuhaoran took a deep breath and quickly formed spell seals with his fingers. He then used the 18 seals to form a mirror shrouded in white mist. Lin. When the mirror was completely formed, Yuhaoran reached out with his right hand and pressed it against the surface of the mirror. He then channeled his Technique Emperor level spell technique energy into the white mist on the surface of the mirror and let out a soft cry. Along with the soft shout, the 2 magical powers in the sealing formation inside the bronze coffin were like hungry wolves, desperately trying to break free from the restraints of the sealing formation and rushing into the white mist on the surface of the mirror. Yuhaoran's command immediately alerted the Blood Void Beast, who was in the midst of increasing the defenses of the treasury's spatial walls, as well as the Thaling, who was using the blood incineration formation to gather energy to break the formation. What a monster! Chapter 1963. In the residence of the Blue Dragon Clan, on the 3rd level of the treasure vault, Thaling, who was already used to Yuhaoran's extraordinary performance, chuckled in response to the Blood Void Beast's heartfelt praise. However, when he sensed the vague aura of the 2 powers from the white mist on the mirror in Yuhaoran's hand, his eyes were immediately filled with surprise and anticipation. The Blood Void Beast, who had also sensed the aura of the powers, wanted to observe Yuhaoran's method of guiding and sealing the powers. However, he was alarmed by the changes in the space barrier. Blood Void Beast, what's wrong? Whether it was the hundreds of martial gods and half-tribulation sovereigns from the Guardian clans or the hundreds of martial gods and half-tribulation sovereigns from the Heavenly Alliance, with the strength that he and the Blood Void Beast possessed, they could easily kill them all. However, this was the critical moment of breaking the seal on the bronze coffin. They could not be disturbed. Therefore, after hearing the Blood Void Beast's surprised voice, Thaling immediately asked anxiously, Thaling, the Guardian clans suddenly stopped attacking the space barrier. The Blood Void Beast replied with a slight frown. The Blood Void Beast's reply made Thaling even more nervous. This was because he was worried that the ancestors of the Blue Dragon clan would have other methods to enter the 3rd level of the treasure vault. No, they are leaving with the help of the teleportation formation. The sudden vibration of the bronze coffin and the formation set up by Thaling made the space barrier on the 3rd level of the treasure vault as hard as an upper supreme grade defensive weapon. However, the Blood Void Beast, who could use the energy of the rules of space, could still clearly sense the spatial fluctuations when the teleportation formation was activated. What's going on? Why did they leave so suddenly? Thaling could not help but frown as he speculated about the sudden departure of the Guardian clans. There's no need to guess. Just as the Blood Void Beast and Thaling were speculating about the reason for the sudden departure of the Guardian clans, Yuhaoran, who had successfully sealed the 2 powers in the white mist on the mirror, stood up and spoke. The hundreds of experts from the Guardian families were forced to leave the treasury. They also left the mountain range where the Blue Dragon family is located. And the reason why they were forced to leave was because the greed of the many experts of the Heavenly Alliance was successfully aroused by the peak supreme being of the Lan clan. "You Howren, how did you know?" The blood foe beast asked in confusion when it heard Yu Howren explain why the protector clans had left. "Yu Howren, did you manage to remove the spell energy from the sealing spell formation?" Thaling asked with a hint of anticipation in his eyes. Yu Howren pointed at the mirror in his right hand and replied with a smile, "I've successfully removed the energy from the 3 spells." Then, he turned around and explained to the Blood Void Beast. "Because in at most 2 minutes, the spatial barrier on the 3rd floor of the treasury will continue to be attacked. You saw it when you broke through to the Technique Emperor realm?" Yu Howren explained confidently. Thaling immediately recalled that he had seen things that he could not predict when he broke through to the Technique Emperor realm in the past. Yu Howren nodded and turned to look at the bronze coffin. Then, he ordered Thaling with a serious expression. "Thaling, remove the seal in the bronze coffin as soon as possible. Let the senior who is being suppressed escape as soon as possible because we're about to encounter an unimaginable crisis." "Got it." He must have seen a scene of the future through Fushi's 8 trigrams innate divination art when he was breaking through to the Technique Emperor realm in Technique Emperor realm. Therefore, Thaling did not ask about the source of the crisis. Instead, he immediately used the blood-burning void-shattering formation that he had set up earlier to remove the seal that had lost its spell energy. "Blood Void Beast, what's the limit of your ability now?" Yu Howren did not pay attention to Thaling removing the seal on the bronze coffin and turned to ask the Blood Void Beast. "The strength of a peak 9th grade sovereign." The Blood Void Beast replied honestly without any hesitation. "If you were facing opponents of the same level, how many could you kill? How many could you defeat? How many could you stall?" Seeing that the Blood Void Beast did not deliberately hide its strength, Yu Howren secretly heaved a sigh of relief and continued to ask. After hearing Yu Howren's question, the Blood Void Beast immediately reminded him with a serious expression. "Although the difference in strength between a peak 9th grade sovereign and a 1st grade sovereign is like the difference between heaven and earth, the difference in strength between 2 people of the same level is actually very small. This is because the strongest technique that the Supremes have mastered is the power of rules. As for those supreme existences who can advance to the sovereign realm, which one of them isn't a monstrous genius with top-notch talent? Which one of them doesn't possess the most outstanding rule power? Therefore, I can at most stall 2 opponents of the same level at the same time, and at most defeat 1 opponent of the same level." After pausing for a moment, the Blood Void Beast pointed at Thaling, who was removing the seal on the bronze coffin, and said with a bitter smile, "Unless I can join forces with Purple Spirit, I will only have a 50 to 70% chance of killing an opponent of the same level." The Blood Void Beast's explanation made Yu Howren's calm expression gradually turn serious, and there was even a trace of hesitation in his eyes. "Yu Howren, what exactly is going on? What kind of unimaginable danger are we going to encounter next?" Yu Howren's seemingly baffling question made the Blood Void Beast gradually realize the seriousness of the problem, and he asked with an equally serious expression. Waving his hand, Yu Howren signaled for the Blood Void Beast to stop talking for now and sat down cross-legged. Then, he used telepathy to contact the 2 clones that had gone to the White Tiger clan and the Vermilion Bird clan. When he learned that the White Tiger clan and the Vermilion Bird clan had used some unknown method to move the mountains where their clans were, he immediately thought of the supreme ancestor of the Blue Dragon clan who had snuck back to the Tianxian continent more than a month ago. He recalled the terrifying projections of the Azure Dragon, the White Tiger, the Vermilion Bird, and the Black Tortoise in the future when he had successfully broken through to the Technique Emperor realm. He thought of the supreme artifacts used by the supreme masters of the Primordial Age and the Middle Age. "Brother Hao, immediately take my sister back to the prince's mansion in Fengrun City." "Understood." His first clone, who was speeding back to the mountain where the Blue Dragon clan was, immediately tore through the void and brought Yusiki back to the prince's mansion in Fengrun City. Brother Ran, immediately take Long-Armed Ape to Whitebone City, one of the 10 great forbidden grounds in the Tianxian continent, and wait for my orders. All right. Chapter 1964. In the residence of the Blue Dragon clan, on the 3rd floor of the treasury. Using telepathy, Yuhauran instructed his 2 clones to head to different locations before opening his eyes and looking at the Thaling and the bronze coffin. Just as he was using telepathy to contact his 2 clones, the blood-red energy condensed from the formation set up by the Thaling had already covered nearly a third of the bronze coffin. At the same time, an intense murderous aura comparable to that of a primordial beast was constantly attacking the suppression of the bronze coffin. 3 minutes. Seeing that Yuhauran had reopened his eyes and was looking at the Thaling and the bronze coffin, the blood-void beast walked up to him and reminded him with a grave expression. In 3 minutes at most, the blood-void burning formation set up by Violet Spirit will be able to completely devour the seal formation, and the forbidden existence suppressed in the bronze coffin will be released. Senior Blood-Void, how much do you know about the greatest supreme expert of the Middle Ages, Xingtian Supreme, who was known as the one who cut through the heavens and earth? Taking a deep breath, Yuhauran slowly stood up and looked at the bronze coffin that was emitting an increasingly intense murderous aura as he asked with a complicated expression. I don't know much about him. Hearing that Yuhauran had taken the initiative to ask about Xingtian Supreme, a trace of surprise flashed through the blood-void beast's eyes before it shook its head and replied. That's because I made a 3-point agreement with the Azure Dragon Sovereign. My physical body cannot easily leave the Azure Dragon clan's encampment. At the same time, my divine sense cannot wander around freely. Therefore, I have only heard a little about Xingtian Supreme from some of the clansmen of the Blue Dragon clan. Xingtian Supreme was originally a descendant of ordinary people. Although his talent, potential, and comprehension were only average, his perseverance was rare in the world. It was with this rare perseverance that he broke through the shackles of talent, potential, and comprehension step by step and finally became a supreme existence. Furthermore, it was because he gradually broke through the shackles of his own limitations that allowed him to accumulate to the pinnacle of each realm. Therefore, Xingtian Supreme had the reputation of being invincible among those of the same realm. At the same time, Sky Punisher was a person who was naturally fond of fighting. His bones were bloodthirsty, and he loved to go around challenging the monstrous geniuses and experts of the various peak powers. Thus, he had secretly offended quite a few people. This was the reason why not many people went to investigate his disappearance after he suddenly disappeared. This is my understanding of Xingtian Supreme. Boom! Just as the blood-void beast's final introduction, a deafening roar came from the 3rd floor of the treasury. Along with the roar, the 3rd floor blood-void beast's floor began to tremble violently. Yuhauran ignored the fierce attack on the 3rd floor of the treasury. He looked at the blood-red energy condensed by the formation, which had already covered half of the bronze coffin, and said with a complicated expression, Senior Shuesu, your understanding of Utmost Heaven Punisher is actually very one-sided. In fact, it could even be said that it is completely wrong. The reason for that is because Utmost Heaven Punisher is simply not a descendant of ordinary mortals. Yuhauran, what did you say? The blood-void beast was shocked and asked in disbelief. This was because when Xingtian Xing had just started to show his talent, there were countless forces that had carefully investigated his background. Therefore, there was absolutely no mistake about the origin of the bloodline. Senior Blood-Void, I just said that not only is Xingtian Supreme not a descendant of ordinary people, but he also has the noblest bloodline inheritance in the world, which is the bloodline inheritance that could compete with the ancient demon tribe in ancient times. Just as Yu Haoran was about to tell the true origin of Xingtian Supreme's bloodline inheritance, the bronze coffin, which was covered by the blood-red energy, suddenly floated up, accompanied by a series of crashing sounds that shook one's divine soul. 1, 2, 3. Boom! When the crashing sounds from the bronze coffin reached 9 times and completely overpowered the roar of the experts from the Sky Alliance attacking the space barrier of the Treasury, the coffin lid, which was tightly closed, was suddenly lifted. Immediately after, a strong evil spirit, which caused numerous cracks to appear on the space barrier of the 3rd floor of the Treasury, gushed out crazily from the bronze coffin. Accompanied by the strong evil spirit, a tall and burly middle-aged man slowly sat up from the bronze coffin. "Where is his head?" Seeing the burly man sitting up in the bronze coffin with nothing above his neck, the tower spirit's eyes widened in anger as it cried out involuntarily. "Where is Xingtian Supreme's head?" Yu Haoran calmly reminded Thaling, who was gradually losing control of his emotions. "Thaling, don't worry. Xingtian Supreme's head is fine. It was just sealed by someone on a star in the endless void. Yu Haoran, give me the specific location. I want to help Xingtian take back his head." Thaling suddenly turned his head and ordered after hearing Yu Haoran's reminder. "No." Without any hesitation, Yu Haoran directly shook his head to reject Thaling's order and gave him a reason for his refusal. "First, there are 3 experts at the peak of 9th grade Supreme on the star where Xingtian Supreme's head is sealed. With your current state and strength, you are no match for the 3 Supreme existences. Second, losing the head that contains the divine soul is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Xingtian Supreme. As long as he can summon the head back with his own ability, the door to the immortal realm will be completely opened." After hearing Yu Haoran's reason for intervening to find Xingtian's lost head, Thaling gradually calmed down. However, at the same time, he couldn't help but feel puzzled and confused. He was puzzled as to how Yu Haoran knew that Xingtian Supreme's head was sealed in a star in the boundless void and the number and cultivation of the experts on that star. He was puzzled as to how Yu Haoran knew that the lost head was related to Xingtian Supreme's breakthrough to the immortal realm. The Blood Void Beast was also puzzled and confused by Thaling's question. Therefore, when Thaling asked the question in his heart, the Blood Void Beast quickly turned its head and looked at Yu Haoran, hoping for a reasonable explanation. Sigh. Looking at the headless Xingtian Supreme slowly standing up from the bronze coffin, Yu Haoran sighed softly. He took a few steps forward and directly activated the transformation of the wizard ancestor. 100 meters. 1,000 meters. 10,000 meters. When the height of the wizard ancestor reached 99,999 meters, Yu Haoran shouted at the headless Xingtian Supreme, who had jumped out of the bronze coffin. "Bloodline of the ancestors, awaken the origin. Will of the ancestors, grant new life." Chapter 1965. In the residence of the Blue Dragon family, on the 3rd floor of the Treasury. Although he didn't have a head, the headless Xingtian Supreme gave the impression that he was raising his head. Ah! Looking at the towering giant that was about to exceed 100,000 meters in height and was suppressing his bloodline origin, Xingtian Xing roared with indignation. At the same time, he clenched his fists and pounded his chest. Every time the iron fists hit his chest, Xingtian Supreme's height would increase by 10,000 meters. Once, twice, thrice. When the iron fists hit his chest 10 times, Xingtian Supreme's height had exceeded 100,000 meters and reached a terrifying height of 1,000,000 meters. At this moment, Xingtian Supreme had truly become a towering giant with his feet on the ground and his head in the air. However, even though Xingtian Supreme was much taller than Yu Haoran, in the eyes of the Thaling and the Blood Void Beast, Yu Haoran, who was at a disadvantage in height, was looking down at Xingtian Supreme with a condescending attitude. "Xingtian, before your head truly returns, before your bloodline surpasses that of the 12 strongest ancestral sorcerers of the ancient times, the level of your bloodline will make you submit to me, Yuhauran. Yuhauran spoke with a cold and indifferent expression as he looked at Prime Xingtian like a superior, ignoring the fact that Prime Xingtian had surpassed him in height. I don't accept this. Yuhauran pointed out the difference in bloodline coldly. Xingtian Supreme, who was determined to surpass the bloodline shackles, opened his arms and roared to the sky. Xingtian Supreme, I don't care if you accept this or not. The difference in bloodline level is an iron rule set by the heavenly way. Facing Xingtian Supreme's roar, Yuhauran put his hand on his shoulder and scolded him coldly. Unless you can break the shackles of the heavenly Tao, you can only follow the iron rules set by the heavenly Tao. Your people can only temporarily submit to the suppression of my bloodline. Then, he pointed at the spatial barrier of the treasury that was about to be breached and ordered with a murderous look in his eyes. Xingtian, I'm sure you know the real reason why your head was cut off and your body sealed. Therefore, what you need to do now is not to persist in suppressing your bloodline, but to immediately devour the flesh and blood essences of those martial gods and half-tribulation supremes to recover your peak strength as soon as possible. That's because the opponents who surrounded and sealed you will soon know that you've escaped. At that time, they will definitely continue to attack you. After hearing Yuhauran's reminder, Xingtian Supreme suddenly stopped his unwilling roar and looked straight at the space barrier that was about to be blasted open. Then, he strode toward the crack in the space barrier, ready to kill the experts from the Sky Alliance who could help him recover his strength quickly. On the other hand, Yuhauran quickly removed the transformation of the wizard's body and returned to Thaling and the Blood Void Beast's side. Yuhauran, what's going on? During the Middle Ages, they had challenged Xingtian Supreme at 3 critical moments and had talked to each other in private for dozens of times. They were close friends, but they had never discovered the secret of the ancient wizard bloodline that Xingtian Supreme possessed. This made Thaling vaguely angry that he had been deceived. Sigh. Looking at Xingtian Supreme, who was guarding in front of the crack in the space barrier, Yuhauran could not help but sigh. Then, he began to explain in detail the secret of Xingtian Supreme possessing the ancient wizard bloodline. Perhaps it was because Xingtian Supreme was not willing to be sealed all the time. Therefore, every time he accumulated enough strength, he would begin to attack the sealing formation of the bronze coffin. The key to sealing the bronze coffin was the 3 magical techniques that were integrated into the sealing formation. Therefore, the 3 magical techniques had to withstand Xingtian Supreme's attacks the most and had to withstand the strongest impact. It was also because of this that the 3 magical techniques were gradually tainted with Xingtian Supreme's aura of destiny. When he had successfully advanced to the level of a spell emperor with the help of the magical techniques in the sealing formation of the bronze coffin, Fushi's 8 trigrams innate divination technique allowed him to see a certain moment in the future. At the same time, Yuhauran also saw the growth trajectory of Xingtian Supreme's life. The ancient wizard race did not lose to the demon race in ancient times in terms of the number and strength of their top powerhouses or the overall strength of their race. The main reason why they could not become the overlords of the ancient continent was because of the small population of their race and the difficulty in reproducing. Therefore, the 12 most powerful ancestral sorcerers at that time had also used the means of intermarriage with other races to increase the ancestral sorcerer's fertility, which was difficult to achieve. However, the result was different. Either the bloodline genes of the ancient wizard race were too powerful, causing the intermarriage races to be unable to conceive, or the bloodline of the ancient wizard race was completely weakened, causing the offspring to be too mediocre. Therefore, the plan to use other races to increase the population of the ancient wizard race was only implemented for less than 10,000 years before it was terminated overnight. Xingtian Supreme's parents were the offspring of the ancient wizard race and human beings after intermarriage. However, The bloodline of the ancient wizard race in Xingtian Supreme's body was too thin. It was so thin that he could barely feel the aura of the bloodline of the ancient wizard race when his cultivation had advanced to the peak of 9th grade Supreme. This was also the reason why Thaling had never discovered that Xingtian Supreme had the bloodline of the ancient wizard race. At the same time, it was also not the reason why Xingtian Supreme deliberately hid it from him. It was because he felt the aura of the bloodline of the ancient wizard race in his body that Xingtian Supreme began to look for a way to activate the bloodline inheritance. This was also the main reason why he rarely appeared in front of the world in the beginning. In the end, Xingtian Supreme found the way to activate the bloodline of the ancient wizard race in the remains of the battle between the ancient 12 ancient wizards and the ancient demon race. With the help of the complete activation of the bloodline of the ancient wizard race, he successfully advanced to the immortal realm. Although the strength of the ancient wizard race was very strong, it was limited by the population of the race and the limitations of the physical cultivation method. Basically, it would not affect the safety of the other top races. This was also the reason why everyone had been living in peace. Later, the most important reason why the ancient demon race took the initiative to start a race war to exterminate the other races was that one of the 12 strongest ancient wizards, called Dijiang, actually discovered the way to cultivate the divine soul. With the strength of the physical body alone, the ancient wizard race could become the top race in the ancient times. If the strongest physical body was combined with the cultivation of the strongest divine soul, there would still be room for the survival of other races. Therefore, this was the real reason why the ancient demon race and the ancient wizard race fought. What about Xingtian Supreme? Just with the cultivation of the divine soul and the law, his cultivation had already reached the peak of 9th grade Supreme. If he was allowed to continue cultivating the body of the ancient wizard race after successfully activating it, wouldn't he have the hope of directly advancing to the immortal realm? Chapter 1966. In the residence of the Blue Dragon clan, on the 3rd floor of the treasure house. Unfortunately, the Supremes and half-tribulation immortal experts who had joined forces to attack Xingtian Supreme were surprised to find that Xingtian Supreme, who had successfully activated the ancestral sorcerer's inherited bloodline, had advanced to the one-tribulation immortal realm, and his body, which had fused with his divine soul and bloodline, was immortal. Therefore, after sacrificing the lives of nearly 30 Supreme Masters from Grade 1 to Grade 9, they could only chop off Xingtian Supreme's head and seal it in a star in the distant void. At the same time, they used the world-suppressing bronze, a treasure made by 3 half-tribulation immortal experts from Buddhism, to completely seal Xingtian Supreme's body. In this way, Xingtian Supreme, whose divine soul and bloodline could not be fused, would not be able to continue improving his cultivation and strength. Moreover, without the nourishment of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, the body of the wizard ancestor would gradually wither and die. I see. Damn it. After hearing Yu Haoran's explanation, the blood-void beast nodded, indicating that it finally understood why Xingtian Supreme was sealed. Thaling, on the other hand, cursed angrily. After using his divine thought to calm Thaling down for the time being, he signaled him to quickly put away the bronze coffin that was used to seal Xingtian Supreme. After all, the stripes on the surface of the bronze coffin were made with a special secret method, which could help to improve the power of law and the comprehension of the occult of the law. Yu Haoran, the fatal danger you mentioned just now, is it the experts who had participated in the siege and sealing of Xingtian Supreme? They will definitely continue to seal him, since they won't let Xingtian Supreme be born safely. He raised his head and looked at the spatial barrier, which had been riddled with countless cracks due to Xingtian Xing's baleful aura, and a worried expression appeared on his face. That's right. While nodding to confirm, Yu Haoran turned to look at Xingtian Supreme, who was crazily slaughtering and devouring the experts of the Heavenly Alliance. He reminded Xingtian Supreme with a worried look in his eyes. Actually, What I'm truly worried about is not the resealing of Utmost Heaven Punisher. Instead, it's those experts that participated in the siege and sealing of Utmost Heaven Punisher. It's very likely that they'll directly take Utmost Heaven Punisher's life. After all, after countless years of cultivation in the Middle Ages and Late Ages, I'm sure that the strength of those peak Utmost Exalted experts would have increased tremendously. I'm afraid that they already possess the means to kill Xing Tianji. After hearing Yu Haoran's reminder, a trace of fear flashed through the blood-void beast's eyes as it asked, "Yu Haoran, what do you want to do?" Since ancient times, when a city gate caught fire, there were countless cases of fish in the moat being implicated. Moreover, not only could they not be considered as bystanders, but they could be considered as accomplices. After all, it was with their help that Xingtian Supreme was finally able to break free from the seal of the bronze coffin. Moreover, the blood-void beast did not know much about the cultivation and advancement of the other experts. However, it knew very well about the four divine beasts: blue dragon, white tiger, vermilion bird, and black tortoise. In ancient times, the white tiger, vermilion bird, and black tortoise, who were merely peak 9th grade sovereign, had successfully advanced to peak 1 tribulation immortal realm. As for the blue dragon, who was more talented and powerful, he had directly advanced to immortal realm 2 tribulation immortal realm. Even if he and Violet Spirit were to work together, they could at most fend off 1 immortal realm 1 tribulation immortal realm expert. As for immortal realm 2 tribulation immortal realm experts, they might not even be able to fend off one of their fingers. I don't know. We can only take one step at a time. Yu Haoran took a deep breath and shook his head. This was because the danger they were facing this time was no less than the destructive impact of the demon god's ancient tomb's self-explosion in his previous life. It was far beyond what he and Thaling could handle. Hurry up and run. There are no rare treasures in the 3rd level of the treasury, like Lan Zongwei said. There's only a headless monster that eats people. A half-tribulation supreme being, who had luckily escaped Xingtian Supreme's giant palm by relying on the extreme speed of the dual law of speed occult, rushed to the 2nd level of the treasury through the crack in the spatial barrier. At the same time, he loudly informed his companions who were about to enter the 3rd level of the treasury. The other party's loud shout immediately attracted the attention of Sky Punisher. When he saw that the half-tribulation supreme being was about to escape through the crack in the spatial barrier, a giant palm that seemed to blot out the sky directly enveloped the half-tribulation supreme being. Don't! The destructive force contained in the giant palm rearranged the crack in the spatial barrier and grabbed the half-tribulation supreme being, who was forced to leave through the crack in the spatial barrier. Then, the giant palm directly pressed the half-tribulation supreme being into the wound on his neck. After that, Xingtian Supreme's aura became stronger. However, it was precisely because of the half-tribulation supreme being's loud shout that nearly half of the martial gods and half-tribulation supreme beings, who had yet to enter the 3rd level of the treasury through the crack in the spatial barrier, began to use the teleportation formation to leave the 2nd level of the treasury. When he sensed that the prey that contained the majestic life essence was about to escape, Xingtian Supreme, who had instantly entered a state of rage, directly clenched his iron fist and ruthlessly smashed the spatial barrier that led to the 2nd level of the treasury. Boom! Accompanied by a deafening roar, the spatial barrier that required hundreds of martial gods and half-tribulation supreme beings to join forces for nearly 10 minutes to barely create a few cracks was directly smashed through and shattered by Xingtian Supreme's punch. This was enough to prove the terror of a supreme being, Xingtian Supreme. As the teleportation formation set up by the Blue Dragon clan was the best, it could teleport as many as 500 people at once. Therefore, when Xingtian Supreme, who had shrunk his body and arrived at the 2nd level of the treasury, saw the empty hall of the treasury. Boom! Without the slightest hesitation, Xingtian Supreme directly raised his iron fist and directly smashed the spatial barrier that led to the first level of the treasury for the second time. Quick, run! The headless monster is chasing after us. More than 300 martial gods and half-tribulation supreme beings, who had just left the teleportation formation, were about to rush to the entrance of the first level of the treasury when the spatial barrier above them suddenly shattered. This made them feel endless fear, and at the same time, they immediately overdrew their divine power and soul power to speed up their escape. Unfortunately, in the face of Xingtian Supreme, who had quickly arrived at the first level of the treasury and directly stretched out his huge palm that covered the sky, less than 100 martial gods and half-tribulation supreme beings finally escaped from the treasury. After pressing the hundreds of martial gods and half-tribulation supreme beings who were tightly grasped in the huge palm into their necks, Xingtian Supreme raised his head and glanced at the treasury that had suppressed him for countless years. Then, he raised his iron fist and smashed the ground of the treasury. Rumble! Accompanied by thunderous rumbles, the sturdy treasury that had survived the ancient, middle, and recent ancient eras finally turned into a pile of broken tiles and broken walls. Chapter 1967. Inside the residence of the Blue Dragon clan. After smashing the 3-story treasury that had suppressed him for countless years, the headless Xingtian Supreme looked at the void above the mountain range. His body gradually emitted a fierce murderous aura and a strong killing intent. The impact of the combination of the murderous aura and the killing intent directly destroyed the void barrier above the mountain range. Endless space turbulence rushed down like a waterfall. Facing the space turbulence that rushed down, Xingtian Supreme did not dodge immediately. Instead, he allowed the turbulence to hit his body. 1,000 meters away, Yu Haoran's eyes were filled with astonishment when he saw that the spatial turbulence, which was powerful enough to destroy a lower-rank utmost exalted-level defensive artifact, was unable to harm Supreme Xingtian in the slightest. Instead, it allowed Supreme Xingtian to borrow the pure destruction energy contained in the spatial turbulence to rapidly recover his cultivation and strength. At the same time, he finally understood why those Supremes and half-tribulation immortal realm experts in the Middle Ages were so afraid of him and why they wanted to kill him. At the same time, Xingtian Supreme's method of recovering his strength with the help of the space turbulence also allowed him to vaguely find a way to improve his cultivation and strength quickly in the future. The strength that had been consumed when he was suppressed for countless years could not be recovered in a short time. Therefore, after looking away from Xingtian Supreme, Yu Haoran ordered the Blood Void Beast. "Senior Xuesu, I'll have to trouble you to capture all the escaping Heavenly Alliance experts and send them to Supreme Xuesu so that he can recover his strength faster." The pure destruction energy contained in the space turbulence could only recover the strength that Xingtian Supreme had consumed, but it could not make up for the potential that had been overdrawn for countless years. Endless potential was the foundation that allowed him to fight those of a higher level. In order to quickly make up for the potential that had been overdrawn, the most effective method was to use the pure life essence and the spiritual power essence contained in the divine spiritual meridian. Therefore, Yu Haoran immediately instructed the pagoda spirit in his sea of consciousness after instructing the Blood Void Beast to capture the 100 escaping half-tribulation supremes. Thaling, seal all the Tier 1 spiritual veins under the mountain range as fast as possible. Except for one low-grade Tier 1 spiritual vein, one mid-grade Tier 1 spiritual vein, and one high-grade Tier 1 spiritual vein, give the rest to Xingtian Supreme. Got it. Thaling, who knew better than Yu Haoran the advantage of the Holy Range in Xingtian Supreme's recovery, nodded in agreement. At the same time, his spiritual soul directly entered the underground of the mountain range and began to use the most powerful sealing method to seal the holy range that had been locked by his spiritual thoughts in advance. Although the Blood Void Beast had yet to display the terrifying means of Sky Punisher, it was able to capture more than 100 half-tribulation Supreme Beings with its strength at the peak of 9th grade Supreme Being realm. Its speed was not inferior to Sky Punisher's speed when he used his giant palm to envelop them. Therefore, just as Yuhauran ordered the Pagoda Spirit to go to the Divine Vein under the Seal Mountain Range, the Blood Void Beast had already successfully captured all the experts who had escaped from the treasury. However, when he saw that the Blood Void Beast had captured the master of the Yushu Temple's Heavenly Palace, the leader of the Heavenly Alliance, and the fake Chosen One, Ji Xing, who was hiding at the edge of the mountain range, and was about to send him to Xingtian Supreme, he hurriedly shouted, "Senior Blood Void, please wait a moment." "What's wrong?" The Blood Void Beast turned his head and asked in confusion. "Let him go," Yuhauran instructed with a complicated look in his eyes as he pointed at Ji Xing, whose face was as pale as a sheet. His eyes were filled with fear, and his body was trembling uncontrollably. Although he had never had a chance to communicate with the spirits of the three Annihilators directly, based on their cautious behavior in the Qinghu mountain range, he guessed that the spirits of the three Annihilators, who had the strength of a sovereign and could control the consciousness of the heavens, probably already knew that Ji Xing was not the real Chosen One. The reason why they did not expose his identity and continued to entrust him with important tasks was probably because Ji Xing was still an important chess piece in their hands. Before he had the strength to contend with the spirits of the three Annihilators, Yuhauran did not want to have a direct conflict with them for the time being. Moreover, the spirits of the three Annihilators' ability to control the consciousness of the heavens and their ability to awaken the dormant heavenly way rules was the most important means to help Xingtian Supreme get through the fatal crisis after he escaped. Therefore, he decided to let Ji Xing live for the time being. Got it? Without asking Yuhauran why he did this, the Blood Void Beast waved its small white claws, and Ji Xing instantly returned to the edge of the mountain range. "Thank you." The joy and relief after escaping from death made Ji Xing temporarily forget the deep hatred between them, and he hurriedly cupped his fists to express his gratitude. "If you don't want to die, you'd better leave this place immediately." Yuhauran ignored Ji Xing's gratitude and reminded him coldly, "Thank you for your reminder, Prince Consort. I'll leave now." After cupping his fists in response, Ji Xing immediately turned into a bolt of lightning and headed straight for the Yushu Temple in the central region. After retracting his gaze from Ji Xing, Yuhauran directly sat down cross-legged and continued to comprehend the essence of the spatial laws imparted to him by the Blood Void Beast. He wanted to use this to improve his own use of the spatial laws, so that he could be of use in the upcoming crisis. After the Blood Void Beast had captured more than 100 half-tribulation sovereigns and forcibly devoured the 9 Level 1 spiritual veins sealed by Thaling, the aura emitted from his body gradually reached the peak of the 9th grade sovereign realm. At the same time, with the help of the pure destructive force contained in the spatial turbulence, his aura was pushed to a higher level. However, just as Xingtian Supreme's strength reached the peak of the 9th grade sovereign realm, a sharp sword aura with the power to destroy the world suddenly slashed toward him from the distant starry sky. The power of the 9th grade sovereign realm. Looking at the sharp sword aura that was slashing toward him, the Blood Void Beast pointed out the power of the sword aura and took the initiative to request to block it. "Yuhauran, let me deal with this sword aura." "Senior Blood Void, be careful." Yuhauran was deeply moved and exhorted it. Nodding its head, the Blood Void Beast took a deep breath and disappeared from Yuhauran's shoulder. Then, it appeared 1,000 meters away from the sharp sword aura. Immediately after, the thin white tail behind it quickly lengthened and lashed out at the void hundreds of meters in front of it. Every time the thin white tail lashed out at the void, the formless void would turn into a solid crystal that blocked the sharp sword aura. Although the crystal-shaped void couldn't block the sharp sword aura's attack, it could at least slow down the speed of the sword aura's attack. When the thin white tail had lashed out at the void 99 times and condensed 99 crystals in the void, the sharp sword aura, which had used up nearly 2/3 of its attack power, completely stopped in midair. Chapter 1968. In the encampment of the Blue Dragon clan. After shattering the sharp sword aura that had been weakened to the level of a peak 7th grade sovereign, the blood void beast instantly returned to Yuhauran's shoulder and reminded him weakly. Yuhauran, in order to shatter the sword aura as quickly as possible, I used a trace of the space rules of order. As a result, my body is now in a weakened state. I will need at least 10 minutes before I can attack again. Senior, you don't need to attack again for the time being. Senior Blood Void Beast can recover in peace. Knowing the price that the Blood Void Beast had to pay to shatter the sharp sword aura of the same level, Yuhauran hurriedly comforted him and gestured to him. Less than 2 seconds after the Blood Void Beast shattered the sharp sword aura, a blood-red saber aura that almost dyed half the sky red slashed toward Xingtian Supreme, who was trying to break through to the First Tribulation Immortal Realm at a speed that could shatter the void. Xingtian Supreme, who was at the critical moment of breaking through to the next realm, could not be disturbed easily. Therefore, Thaling quickly left the Sea of Consciousness with the Spacetime Victor and reminded Yuhauran. Yuhauran, it's my turn now. Be careful. Yuhauran also reminded him. Got it. Thaling nodded in response to Yuhauran's reminder and took a deep breath. Like the blood void beast, he disappeared from the spot and reappeared 1,000 meters away from the blood-red saber aura. Then, Thaling returned to the Spacetime Victor and controlled the Spacetime Victor to meet the blood-red saber aura. Boom! When the Spacetime Victor collided with the blood-red saber aura, a roar that shook the entire Tianxian continent resounded in the void above the mountain range. Along with the roar that shook the entire Tianxian continent, the Spacetime Victor was pushed back 100 meters. The blood-red saber chi was directly shattered. Just as Thaling controlled the Spacetime Victor to return to the surface, an iron fist as large as a mountain slammed into the defenseless Spacetime Victor at a speed that transcended time and space. Boom! Accompanied by a roar that shook the entire profound sky continent, the mountain-like iron fist was knocked back several hundred meters. The Spacetime Victor was blasted to the ground. Spatial Seal. Looking at the Spacetime Victor that was smashing into the ground like a meteor, Yuhauran immediately took out a space crystal the size of a bowl. While devouring the pure space energy within the space crystal, he also used the Space Law Sealing Array to slow down the speed at which the Spacetime Victor was falling. Fortunately, the Spatial Seal slowed down the fall, and the Thaling did not suffer too much damage. In the end, the Spacetime Victor stopped falling when it was less than 10 meters from the ground. Thaling, let me do it! Seeing that Thaling controlled the Spacetime Victor to rush back to the mountain range, Yuhauran reached out and pressed on a corner of the Spacetime Victor, and with a dignified expression, he took the initiative to ask for a fight. Yuhauran, the power of the fist condensed by the fist technique, is also at the peak of the 9th grade supreme martial artist. It is not something you can deal with. When he heard that Yuhauran wanted to deal with the Iron Fist alone, Thaling explained the power of the Iron Fist briefly and shook his head to reject his request. Thaling, don't you know what kind of person I, Yuhauran, am? In the face of the Tower Spirit's rejection, Yuhauran reminded with a strong sense of confidence. When have you ever seen me do something so stupid as to seek my own death? Every action I take is the result of careful consideration. This. In the face of Yuhauran's confident reminder, Thaling did not know how to refute. After all, his reminder just now was not boasting at all. However, thinking that the Supreme Martial Artist realm was very different from the previous realms, in order to prevent Yuhauran from having an unpredictable accident, Thaling did not object to him dealing with the Iron Fist alone, but asked him to bring the Spacetime Victor back to the space of the Sea of Consciousness, so that it could help at the critical moment. In this regard, Yuhauran could neither object nor object, and could only nod in agreement. After Thaling brought the spacetime victor back to the space of the Sea of Consciousness, Yuhauran directly used the space law martial technique of teleportation and instantly appeared 10 meters away from the Iron Fist. But then, the space law martial technique of teleportation caused him to retreat nearly 300 meters, and he looked at the Iron Fist with an extremely frightened expression. Originally, he thought that he had the strength to fight against a supreme martial artist because he could use the power of the space law to deal with the greatly weakened Blood Void Beast. But when he was 10 meters away from the Iron Fist unintentionally emitted a terrifying aura that almost caused his physical body and the space of the Sea of Consciousness to collapse directly. At the same time, the means that he had prepared to use to deal with the Iron Fist were completely ineffective. However, since he had already boasted in front of Thaling and the Blood Void Beast, if he retreated without a fight, not only would his status in the Blood Void Beast's heart be lowered, but it would also cause a flaw in his state of mind. While using the speed advantage of teleportation to attract the Iron Fist's attack, Yuhauran quickly thought of a solution. The Rui Bell, integrated with 6 chaotic marks, had the power of a lower supreme martial artist defensive celestial device. If it was combined with 4 innate 5 elements formation flags, its defensive power could at least be raised to the level of an upper supreme martial artist celestial device. If it was combined with the physical body of an ancestral wizard, which was not inferior to a third tribulation supreme martial artist, it should be able to withstand a blow from the Iron Fist. But passive defense was always the performance of a weakling in a battle. If he really wanted to solve the crisis of the Iron Fist, he had to think of a way to increase the power of his attacks. Although there were many secret techniques recorded in the Destiny Stone Tablet that could increase one's strength, none of them could allow Emperor Wu, who was only at the peak of 9th grade martial artist, to directly surpass the 2 nature-defying realms of martial god and supreme martial artist. After thinking for a long time, he still could not find a way to directly break the Iron Fist. In desperation, Yuhauran could only use the stupidest method, which was to use the extreme speed of teleportation to slowly deplete the energy of the Iron Fist that could not recover its strength. Eventually, he could weaken it to the point that it could be broken by him. Dodging once or twice was still acceptable. Dodging 3 or 4 times had already gradually aroused the Iron Fist's suspicion. When he used the space law martial technique of teleportation for the 5th time and easily dodged the Iron Fist's pursuit, the Iron Fist suddenly stopped its momentum of continuing to chase him. Then, it turned around and went straight for Xingtian's supreme martial artist. "Cowardly trash, if you have the guts, continue to fight with me for 300 rounds. Immediately stopping the space law martial technique of teleportation, Yuhauran looked at the Iron Fist with contempt and used harsh words to provoke it. Chapter 1969. In the encampment of the Blue Dragon clan. Seeing that the speed of the Iron Fist had increased by at least 3 times, Yuhauran didn't dare to be careless and used teleportation in advance to dodge it. He also asked the Thaling in his consciousness about the extent of the opponent's energy consumption. Under the influence of his exasperation, he overdrew energy that he couldn't recover in exchange for 3 times the attack speed, causing the Iron Fist's energy consumption to reach 1/10 of its energy per second. Now, the attack power of the Iron Fist has been weakened to the early stage of a 9th grade supreme martial artist. After successfully dodging the Iron Fist's attack, the Thaling in his consciousness continued to remind him. It has been weakened to the mid-stage of an 8th grade supreme martial artist. He dodged the Iron Fist's attack again. It has been weakened to the early stage of a 7th grade supreme martial artist. He dodged the Iron Fist's attack for the 3rd time. It has been weakened to the peak of a 4th grade supreme martial artist. By the time he dodged the Iron Fist's attack for the 4th time and its power had been weakened to the peak of a 1st grade supreme martial artist, the Iron Fist had already realized its mistake. Not only did it not continue to pursue Yu Haoran, but it also didn't turn around to deal with Xingtian Supreme. Instead, it directly shattered the mountain range's void barrier, intending to return to the endless void. Weak ant, I'll now give you a chance to prove yourself. Seeing that the Iron Fist had actually given up on attacking and returned to the endless void, Yu Haoran, who had already secretly used a secret technique to increase his strength and was ready to launch a fierce counterattack, couldn't just watch the other party leave. The space rule martial technique of teleportation allowed him to quickly appear in front of the Iron Fist, and he continued to provoke it with the posture of a peerless expert. Ant, I'll now stand still on the spot. As long as you can hurt me a little, I'll kill myself in front of you. After hearing Yu Haoran's arrogant provocation, the Iron Fist suddenly stopped its momentum of returning to the endless void, and then, at the cost of burning all its energy, it heavily blasted towards the reckless young man in front of it. Considering that a supreme martial artist could control the power of rules, Yu Haoran quickly mobilized the 4 innate 5 elements flag array and the defense of the ancestral wizard's body while activating the strongest defense of the Rui Bell. Boom! Accompanied by a deafening roar, the Iron Fist that was burning with all its energy completely disappeared into the void. On the other hand, Yu Haoran stood there motionlessly. His calm expression made it seem as if he had not been attacked at all. In fact, a calm expression did not mean that his heart was calm. At this time, Yu Haoran's heart was filled with lingering fear. At the same time, he also felt incomparably fortunate. He was glad that he had acted cautiously. Although the Rui Bell combined with the 4 innate 5 elements formation flags and the defense of the ancestral sorcerer's physical body, its power had reached the level of a supreme upper-grade defensive magic weapon. However, when faced with the Iron Fist's final rule power, it had almost caused its defense to collapse. Fortunately, the physical body of the ancestral magus was innately able to restrain the rule power used by the other party, allowing him to get through the crisis safely. At the same time, through his own experience, he truly witnessed the terror of a supreme being powerhouse, and finally experienced the strength of the rule power. It would bring unimaginable benefits to his breakthrough to the martial god realm. Damn it! Seeing that his carefully prepared fist technique had not only failed to destroy the recovery of Xingtian Supreme's state, but also failed to hurt the weak ant that had blocked the Iron Fist attack, an angry curse came from the endless void. Weak ant, don't be discouraged. In fact, your strength is not bad, but you lack some combat experience. When Yu Haoran heard the curses coming from the endless void, there was a hint of suppressed anger. A thought suddenly flashed through his mind, and Yu Haoran could not help but take the risk to test it out. How about this? You continue to attack, and I will personally give you some combat experience based on what I have discovered during the fight. Yu Haoran, don't try to anger the other party. Otherwise, the other party will definitely kill you at all costs. When he heard that Yu Haoran was going to personally give the other party some combat experience, Thaling's expression changed abruptly, and he hurriedly reminded him. After all, as an artifact spirit at the peak of the Supreme Being realm, Thaling knew very well that the Supreme Being valued dignity and face the most. Yu Haoran seemed to have kindly given the other party some combat experience, but in fact it was a blatant humiliation. This would completely arouse the other party's killing intent, causing the other party to abandon all concerns and kill him. Thaling, don't worry, I know what I'm doing. Yu Haoran, whose face was full of confidence, smiled and comforted him. Puff! In the face of Yu Haoran's face-slapping humiliation, the Supreme Being expert hidden in the endless void finally spat out 3 mouthfuls of blood in a fit of rage due to various restrictions, causing his mind to suffer a lot of trauma. Shut up, you ignorant child! Just as the Supreme Being who had used the Iron Fist spat out blood, a majestic and powerful rebuke came from the endless void. At the same time, along with the majestic and powerful rebuke, a fire dragon, whose body emitted scorching heat, crossed the barrier of time and space and rapidly approached Yu Haoran. Yu Haoran, leave it to me. Seeing that the fire dragon was also at the peak of the 9th grade Supreme Being realm, Thaling, who had quickly returned to the spacetime victor, reminded him. Thaling, let me continue to consume the fire dragon's strength. Seeing that the Supreme Being who had spat out 3 mouthfuls of blood due to anger and did not directly attack him, Yu Haoran confirmed his conjecture. He planned to continue provoking the fire dragon to delay Xingtian Supreme's recovery of the First Tribulation Immortal Realm's strength. Because as long as Xingtian Supreme's cultivation could recover to the First Tribulation Immortal Realm, under special restrictions, Xingtian Supreme would be able to barely cope with the attacks of several half-tribulation Immortal Realm saints. If the fire dragon ignores my provocation and chooses to attack Xingtian Supreme directly, you'll have to deal with the fire dragon personally. Okay. Thaling also knew that Yu Haoran was using the advantage of provoking and speed to buy more time for Xingtian Supreme to recover his strength. Of course, he would not oppose his plan. Your strength is passable. Using the space law martial technique of instant movement, Yu Haoran pretended to be a peerless expert and commented on the fire dragon. Roar. After letting out a deafening roar, the fire dragon suddenly increased its speed by nearly 5 times. With a speed infinitely close to teleportation, it quickly appeared in front of Yu Haoran. Fortunately, Yu Haoran, who had been prepared in advance, immediately used the space law martial technique of instant movement. Before the fire dragon's terrifying aura could destroy his body and consciousness, he quickly distanced himself from the fire dragon. Roar. Seeing that it could not catch up with Yu Haoran even after increasing its speed by 5 times, the fire dragon continued to let out a deafening roar. Chapter 1970. Inside the residence of the Blue Dragon clan. After increasing his speed twice in a row, the speed of the fire dragon's pursuit was not inferior to teleportation. This made it impossible for Yu Haoran to stop using the space rule martial technique of teleportation. He had no problem using the space rule martial technique twice in a row. It was still okay to use the space rule martial technique 3 or 4 times in a row. He was still able to persist using the space rule martial technique 5 or 6 times in a row. However, using the space rule martial technique 7 or 8 times in a row had already caused his face to gradually turn pale. After all, using the space rule martial technique consumed one's own comprehension of the power of laws, as well as a huge amount of divine power and soul power. With Emperor Wu's strength reserve at the complete 10th grade realm, it was already very difficult for him to use the space rule martial technique 8 times in a row. If this situation continued, he would be unable to continue using teleportation due to his insufficient strength sooner or later, and the fire dragon, whose strength had reached the peak of 9th grade supreme, would catch up with him. After forcibly using the space rule martial technique of teleportation for the 10th time, Yu Haoran could only helplessly ask for help from the Thaling in his consciousness space. However, just as he was about to ask for help, the fire dragon that was chasing him suddenly opened its bloody mouth and spat out a ball of white flame that emitted an extremely high temperature. The white flame was so fast that it exceeded the speed of teleportation, and it quickly enveloped Yu Haoran, who could no longer continue using teleportation. Feeling the extremely high temperature brought by the white flame and the terrifying destructive power it contained, Yu Haoran could clearly feel the arrival of the Grim Reaper. However, facing the imminent crisis of death, not only did the expected fear and panic not appear, but through the process of the white flame burning the void barrier, he gradually understood the true essence of the space rule power. With the help of his understanding of the true essence of the space rule power, Yu Haoran gradually grasped a trace of the essence of the space rule martial technique, and used the trace of the essence that he had comprehended to successfully use the space rule martial technique of teleportation with less than 1% of his strength. After narrowly dodging the white flames, Yu Haoran felt extremely fortunate, and at the same time, his face revealed an extremely pleasantly surprised expression. This was because he discovered that not only was the consumption of his strength reduced by nearly 10 times, but the speed of his teleportation had also increased by nearly 3 times. Not only would a threefold increase in speed allow him to dodge the fire dragon's attacks more easily, but he could also use pills and space crystals to quickly recover his strength as well as deepen his comprehension of the laws of space. At the same time, the continuous increase in speed and the use of the fire elemental nomological force to attack caused the fire dragon, which was unable to replenish its energy, to rapidly fall from the peak of a 9th-grade supreme martial artist to the peak of an 8th-grade supreme martial artist. Seeing that not only was Yu Haoran's speed getting faster and faster, but that his aura was also gradually getting stronger, the peak martial saint who had unleashed the fire dragon knew that his plan to avenge his companion had completely failed. Therefore, he used his thoughts to inform the fire dragon, which already had a trace of spirituality, to give up its pursuit of Yu Haoran and turn around to deal with Xingtian Supreme, who was recovering his cultivation and strength. Thouling, it's your turn. He knew that after being taught a lesson by the owner of the Iron Fist, who vomited blood and got injured, it was no longer possible to use verbal provocation and humiliation to anger the other party. Therefore, when he saw that the fire dragon had turned around to deal with Xingtian Supreme, Yu Haoran could only choose to let Thouling take action. Fortunately, the fire dragon's strength had already fallen to the peak of an 8th-grade supreme martial artist, and before Thouling left the space of the Sea of Consciousness in advance, the fire dragon was easily killed by the secret attack using the spacetime energy. "Kid, I'll remember you." Seeing that the fire dragon, which he had condensed using 90% of his strength and the nomological force, was similarly killed by Yu Haoran and Purple Spirit without any effect, the peak martial saint's threat filled with hatred came from the endless void. "Coward who only knows how to talk big. If you have the guts, come and kill me." The power of the spatial laws, which was about to advance to the profound laws, and the teleportation law martial technique, which increased his speed by 3 times, gave Yu Haoran the confidence to avoid the attack and pursuit of a peak 9th-grade supreme martial artist. Therefore, in the face of the peak martial saint's threat in the endless void, he was not afraid at all and took the initiative to provoke. Of course, he also hoped to continue to verify his guesses through his provocation. "Kid, I'm going to kill you." In the face of Yu Haoran's provocation, the peak martial saint, who had an average mentality, quickly left the place of cultivation and rushed to Tianxian continent after roaring angrily. However, at this moment, a slightly old voice sounded in the endless void. "Xia Moli, don't forget your promise." After hearing the old voice's reminder, the peak martial saint, who was called Xia Moli, changed his expression slightly, and a trace of fear appeared in his eyes. Then, he directly turned back to the place of cultivation and activated the defensive array of the place of cultivation. Then, he used his strong state of mind cultivation to calm the raging anger in his heart. At the same time, he also used a special secret method to contact the Xia family in Tianxian continent and ask them to use the family's accumulated resources to kill Yu Haoran. However, to Xia Moli's surprise, the Xia family's clan leader not only rejected the order to kill Yu Haoran, but also asked him to do his best to protect Yu Haoran. This made Xia Moli so angry that he almost vomited blood. Just as Xia Moli gave up on the idea of rushing into Tianxian continent to kill Yu Haoran, the old voice that reminded him just now sounded again. "Young man, regardless of talent and potential, or the comprehension and use of the power of the spatial laws, you are the most outstanding genius I have ever seen in my life. Based on your current performance, the martial god realm is just the beginning of your martial arts path. The martial saint realm is just the training in the process of martial arts cultivation. The immortal realm is the ultimate peak of martial arts that you will climb to. Young man, you have such a bright future. It is not worth offending us seniors who have been cultivating for countless years for the sake of a bloodthirsty and tyrannical demon. Then, you will lose the hope of reaching the peak of martial arts in the future. Senior, are you threatening me? Yuharan asked as he looked into the endless void while recovering his strength with the help of elixirs and space crystals. No, it is not a threat. It is just a kind reminder. After denying Yuharan's question, the old voice continued. Xingtian is overbearing, narrow-minded, and selfish. Even if you help him now, not only will he not repay you in the future, but he might also covet the power of the spatial laws that you have comprehended. Chapter 1971. Inside the residence of the Blue Dragon clan, Yuharan sneered as he faced the threat of the old voice in the endless void. Senior, what if I don't leave? If you don't leave, you will be seen as Xingtian Supreme's accomplice, and your soul will be destroyed. The old voice gradually lost its patience and threatened with a murderous aura. Even Supreme Purple Spirit and the Blood Void Beast will not be able to escape the fate of being destroyed. Senior, since I started my career, I have always followed the principle of finishing what I started. Yuharan countered with a righteous aura in the face of the old voice's murderous aura. Since I was the one who removed Senior Xingtian Supreme's seal, I have the obligation to help him get through this calamity. This is how I conduct myself, how I handle things, and how I do things. Good, very good. Hearing Yuharan's irrefutable reasoning, the old voice said good twice in a row, then stretched out a bone-like palm and patted the Tianxian continent lightly. Then, a giant palm that covered the sky quickly appeared in the void of the Tianxian continent at a speed that transcended the barriers of time and space. Damn old fox! Yuharan couldn't help but curse when he saw the other party's palm attack range directly enveloping him and Xingtian Supreme. This was because the other party was forcing him to be unable to use his martial technique of teleportation to avoid the attack. At the same time, although he was far away from the giant palm that covered the sky, judging from the aura emitted by the giant palm that could directly shatter the void, the strength of the other party was at least at the peak of the 9th grade Supreme. Helpless, he could only hand over the task of dealing with the giant palm to Thaling. Yuharan, you should return to the ground first. Thaling reminded him with a serious expression as he left the consciousness space with the spacetime victor. Okay, be careful. Yuharan nodded and instructed. He then teleported back to the ruins of the treasury. Then, he sat down cross-legged and took out the connate crystal given to him by the Blood Void Beast. He set up a formation that could convert chaotic spiritual energy and started to improve his cultivation. He had a vague feeling that there were many experts who wanted to stop Xingtian Supreme from returning to his peak, and there were even more Supreme and half-tribulation immortal experts who wanted to kill Xingtian. There were so many of them that Thaling couldn't stop them. Therefore, he needed to use unconventional means to stall for time. That was to break through to the martial god realm in advance, and then use the divine tribulation lightning punishment to awaken the heavenly Tao precepts, temporarily stopping the experts in the endless void from continuing to attack. Although breaking through to the martial god realm in advance might cause him to lose an opportunity to transform, in order to satisfy Thaling's friendship and protect Thaling's safety, losing the opportunity to transform was worth it. Thaling, who had merged with the spacetime victor, had to hit the giant palm 3 times with all his strength before he finally destroyed it completely. This made him feel extremely depressed, and at the same time, his desire to return to his peak as soon as possible grew stronger. If he could return to the peak of 9th grade Supreme, he would be able to destroy the Iron Fist and the giant palm easily without using the spacetime victor. At the same time, he would be able to directly attack the masters of the Iron Fist and the giant palm in the endless void with the dozens of secret skills he had acquired and created over the years. More importantly, after returning to his peak, he would be able to use the strongest power of the spacetime victor, which would allow him to easily kill a peak of 9th grade supreme and severely injure a 1 tribulation immortal realm expert. Ah! Just as Thaling destroyed the giant palm that covered the sky, Xingtian Supreme, who had been standing in the ruins of the treasury, suddenly let out a deafening roar. Oh no, Xingtian Supreme is about to regain the strength of a 1 tribulation immortal realm expert. Everyone, attack him at the same time. Just as Xingtian Supreme let out a thunderous roar, a slightly flustered but strong voice came from the endless void. At the reminder of the flustered voice, more than 40 streaks of sword chi, saber chi, rod chi, spear chi, and iron fist appeared in the endless void immediately. Thaling, come back quickly! Just as the strong reminder came from the endless void, Yu Haoran knew that things were developing as he had expected. Therefore, without any hesitation, he raised his head and called for Thaling to come back quickly. At the same time, he began to mobilize all his strength to break through to the martial god realm. However, just as the boundless god power and soul energy, combined with the mysteries of the laws of life and death, were charging toward the bottleneck of the martial god realm, Xingtian Xing suddenly stopped roaring. He quickly transformed into a 1,000,000-foot-tall grand shaman. Then, he swung his mountain-like iron fists and smashed them heavily toward the sword energy, saber energy, rod energy, spear energy, and other attacking laws of nature. Seeing that Xingtian Supreme had successfully recovered the strength of a 1 tribulation immortal realm expert, Thaling let out a sigh of relief. He immediately returned to Yu Haoran's sea of consciousness with the help of the space-time energy. However, at this moment, Yu Haoran suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, his face as pale as a sheet of paper. Yu Haoran, what's wrong with you? Thaling asked when he saw Yu Haoran spitting out blood and his divine force and soul chi going berserk in his body. I'm fine. I'm just suppressing the backlash caused by the breakthrough. Yu Haoran quickly took out a top-notch healing pill and swallowed it. As he sat down cross-legged to heal himself, he gave a simple explanation to Thaling. Yu Haoran, thank you. In fact, when Yu Haoran had decided to move the prince's mansion back to the 100 Chi Gate in the southern region, he had mentioned it to him in detail. He had said that if he could break through to the martial god realm in the mountain range where the 100 Chi Gate was located, he might obtain an unexpected opportunity to transform. This was also the main reason why he had been unwilling to break through to the martial god realm. Now that he suddenly suffered from the backlash of breaking through to the martial god realm, he must have wanted to use the god tribulation thunder to stop the attacks of the Supremes and half-tribulation immortal realm experts in the endless void to buy more time for Xingtian Supreme to recover his peak strength and strength. The reason he took such a risk was definitely to satisfy his brotherly feelings. Therefore, after hearing the reason why Yu Haoran vomited blood and was injured, Thaling was filled with gratitude. His voice trembled as he sincerely thanked Yu Haoran. Yu Haoran only waved his hand in response. After that, he slowly closed his eyes and seized the time to heal his injuries. Fortunately, when Xingtian Supreme attacked the 40-odd strands of divine force and soul chi, his divine force and soul chi had just fused with the mysteries of the laws of life and death. He hadn't truly touched the bottleneck of the martial god realm, so the backlash he suffered wasn't very serious. With the help of the top-notch healing pill, it took less than 2 minutes for the damage caused by the backlash to be completely healed. Chapter 1972. Inside the Blue Dragon Clan's encampment. All Supreme Being friends, please step down. Xingtian Supreme was able to defeat the rule power of more than 40 Supremes at the same time with just a pair of iron fists. This alone was enough to prove that he had completely recovered his cultivation and strength as a Tribulation 1 immortal. Therefore, just as the remaining dozen or so peak 9th grade Supreme Martial Artists were about to make their move, a voice came from the endless void, its exact location undetectable. That's Black Tortoise Prime's voice. The blood-foe beast quickly returned to Yu Haoran's shoulder, and reminded him with a slightly panicked expression when the voice urging him to retreat rang out in the endless space. Whether Xingtian Supreme can survive the real calamity after escaping will depend on his performance. When the blood-void beast pointed out that the owner of the voice was Black Tortoise Prime, Yu Haoran immediately thought of the future he saw when he advanced to the Technique Emperor realm. He couldn't help but sigh with a serious expression. Blue dragon, white tiger, vermilion bird, black tortoise, lousy, primordial origin, ancestor of the underworld, Fu Xing, Du Yuan, show yourselves. Supreme Xingtian raised his head to look at the boundless void and spoke in an indifferent tone after hearing the voice urging him to retreat from the boundless void. Since Brother Xingtian is the one who invited us, the four of us will accept your invitation. Accompanied by a seemingly polite but arrogant reply, a green divine dragon that was 1,000,000 meters long, a white tiger that was more than 1,000,000 meters tall, a vermilion bird that had a wingspan of more than 1,000,000 meters, and a gray-black tortoise that was as big as a city slowly walked out of the clouds in the endless void. The four giant beasts seemed to be walking slowly, but their terrifying speed far surpassed teleportation. They appeared in the void of the Tianxian continent within 10 seconds. Senior Blood Void, don't worry. These are just the projections of the four divine beasts. They only have 1/10 of their original strength at most. I don't know if they can defeat Xingtian Supreme, but they won't be able to hurt you in front of me, Yu Haoran. Just as the four divine beasts appeared in the void above the mountain range, Yu Haoran suddenly felt the blood-void beast on his shoulder start to tremble violently, and the aura in its body gradually became chaotic. He knew very well what kind of pressure the four divine beasts with terrifying strength had brought to the blood-void beast for countless years. He also knew that the pressure had already caused fear to form in its heart. Therefore, Yu Haoran immediately pretended to be extremely confident and comforted it. In fact, he wasn't pretending to be confident. After all, the spatial laws of space martial technique, instant teleportation, which increased his speed by 3 times, allowed him to truly avoid the extreme speed of a 9th-grade supreme martial artist and a First Tribulation Immortal Realm expert. Projection. After hearing Yu Haoran's reminder, the blood-void beast's eyes flashed with determination. It immediately mobilized the little remaining spatial rules of law energy in its body to take the risk to check on the four divine beasts in the void of the mountain range. Finally, it got the same answer as Yu Haoran. It was just a projection, not the arrival of their original bodies. The fear in the blood-void beast's heart immediately dissipated by more than half. At the same time, it was full of confidence that Xingtian Supreme could defeat and kill the four divine beasts' projections. After all, as an existence who was once at the peak of the immortal realm, it could clearly feel how powerful Xingtian Supreme could be after returning to the peak realm. However, when another 5 experts in Taoist robes walked out of the void, the blood-void beast's confidence in Xingtian Supreme was immediately reduced by 90%. The 5 experts in Taoist robes who walked out of the endless void were all projections of immortal realm experts with one tribulation. Illusory origin. Fu Sheng. Du Yuan. Greetings, eldest senior brother. When the 5 experts in Taoist robes appeared in the void of the mountain range, 3 of them stepped forward and cupped their fists in salute. Since you destroyed junior brother Tongtian's divine soul and chopped off my head, our brotherhood has been severed. Facing illusory origin supreme, old man Fu Xing, and old man Du Yuan's salute, Xingtian Supreme tried his best to suppress the sadness and anger in his heart and resolutely refused to accept their salute. When Xingtian Supreme mentioned that Tongtian Supreme had been killed by the 3 people in front of him, the eyes of Thaling in Yu Haoran's sea of consciousness immediately turned scarlet, and unimaginable killing intent radiated from him. Afraid that Thaling's killing intent would attract the attention of the 9 half-tribulation immortal realm experts in the void of the mountain range, Yuhauran tried his best to seal the space in his sea of consciousness while using his mind to forcefully summon the furious Thaling. At the same time, the blood-void beast also sensed that something was wrong and hurriedly entered the space in his sea of consciousness. Then, it cooperated with Yuhauran's mind and finally succeeded in awakening the furious Thaling. Yuhauran, I'm willing to use all the primordial crystals and the time acceleration ability of the time and space victor to improve the cultivation of the life calamity spirit rat. After waking up from his rage, Thaling took a deep breath and took out the 10 primordial crystals given by the blood-void beast from the victor. Then, he asked Yuhauran for help. I only have one condition for doing this, which is to control the fate of origin, Fuxing, and Du Yuan as soon as the life-stealing spirit rat reaches the first tribulation immortal realm, so that I can take revenge for Tongtian with my own hands. The blood-void beast was about to leave Yuhauran's sea of consciousness when it saw that Violet Spirit had awoken from its rage. However, Violet Spirit suddenly mentioned the life calamity spirit rat and the fates of the 3 half-tribulation immortal realm experts. A thought suddenly flashed through its mind and it immediately recognized Yuhauran's true identity. Yuhauran, you're the son of Destiny? That's right. Facing the blood-void beast's shocked and expectant questioning, Yuhauran didn't hide anything and nodded. After all, when he returned to the prince consort's mansion, he would need to use the aura of destiny to check the secrets hidden in the portrait. By then, he wouldn't be able to hide it from the blood-void beast, who could control the power of space rules. Yuhauran, have you already obtained the loyalty of the Destiny Stone Tablet and the Life Calamity Spirit Rat? The blood-void beast clenched its short claws and continued to ask with more expectation in its eyes. That's right. Yuhauran also didn't hide anything and nodded. Yuhauran, I need to adjust my emotions. After receiving Yuhauran's honest acknowledgement, the blood-void beast, whose emotions were fluctuating violently, did not know what to say or do. It could only temporarily fly to the edge of Yuhauran's sea of consciousness and use a special secret technique to adjust its emotions. Thaling, I promise you. Chapter 1973. Inside the residence of the Blue Dragon Clan. In the face of Supreme Xingtian's refusal to accept their greetings as his junior brothers, Supreme Illusory Void, Old Man Fuxing, and Old Man Du Yuan took a step back. Following that, a kind-looking old man in a green Taoist robe and a fierce-looking old man in a red Taoist robe stepped forward and cupped their fists in greeting. Li Er, Underworld Ancestor. Greetings, Taoist Xingtian. Supreme Xingtian did not turn a blind eye to Supreme Laozi and Supreme Underworld Ancestors' greeting, nor did he treat them coldly. Instead, he cupped his hands and greeted them back. Xingtian Supreme greets Taoist Li and Underworld Ancestor. Xingtian Supreme, you're cruel and bloodthirsty. You don't have any scruples when you do things. You could easily bring unpredictable disasters to this world. Xingtian's courteous treatment of Laozi and Nether Ancestor caused Sovereign White Tiger, who was being looked down upon, to feel extremely displeased. After taking a step forward, White Tiger Supreme said arrogantly as if he was the ruler of the world. For the safety of billions of living beings in this world, and for the opportunity that hundreds of Taoists have been waiting for countless years, you'd better return to the bronze coffin obediently. Otherwise, your sealed head may be the only thing left in this world. You! Xingtian Supreme sneered disdainfully. Although Xingtian Supreme didn't have a head, the half-tribulation immortal experts present could clearly feel the contempt and disdain in his eyes when he looked at White Tiger Supreme. That's right, me. Xingtian Supreme's disdain angered the hot-tempered White Tiger Supreme instantly. At the same time, a giant sword formed by the law of slaughter quickly slashed toward Xingtian Supreme's headless neck. Break! Xingtian Supreme shouted as he waved his mountain-like fist to meet the giant sword. Boom! Accompanied by a rumble that shook the entire eastern region and central region, the gigantic sword that was condensed from the power of the massacre nomological laws shattered. The giant fist, which wasn't damaged at all, continued to smash toward White Tiger Supreme. White Tiger Supreme couldn't help but change his expression when he saw the giant sword formed by his law of slaughter easily shattered by Xingtian Supreme. Then, he opened his bloody mouth that was big enough to swallow mountains and lakes and roared at the giant fist. Woo! Accompanied by a thunderous roar, sound waves that directly shattered the void barrier continued to collide with the giant fist that came crashing down. Although the vibrating power formed by the sound waves was continuously weakening the power of the giant fist, the White Tiger Sovereign's idea of using the sound wave secret technique to block the giant fist was destroyed by the fact that the giant fist's bombardment speed didn't slow down in the slightest. Seeing that the projection of the White Tiger Sovereign was about to be heavily injured by the gigantic fist, the Azure Dragon Sovereign immediately swung his gigantic Azure Dragon tail, fiercely smashing it towards the gigantic fist. Boom! Along with the roar that was enough to shake the entire Tianxian continent, Xingtian Supreme was forced to take 3 steps back because he couldn't bear the huge force of the fist. As for the Azure Dragon Sovereign, who was waving his Azure Dragon tail, due to the powerful rebounding force, his gigantic body of 1,000,000 meters was forced back 9 steps. I didn't expect it. I really didn't expect it. Although your cultivation couldn't improve after being suppressed for so many years, it allowed you to truly comprehend the essence of the law of destruction. After rapidly stabilizing his gigantic body, the Azure Dragon Sovereign sighed with a grave expression on his face. If you let your head return to your body, I'm afraid your cultivation can directly reach the immortal level 3. Blue Dragon Supreme seemed to admire Xingtian Supreme's improvement in strength, but in fact, he was warning everyone present in a very insidious way. If they waited until Xingtian Supreme summoned his sealed head back, those who had participated in besieging and sealing him back then wouldn't have a good ending. Therefore, when they heard Blue Dragon Supreme's introduction of Xingtian Supreme's strength, not only were the Supremes in the Endless Void frightened, but the 8 half-tribulation Immortal Realm experts on the scene also showed fear in their eyes. At the same time, Supreme Laozi and the other 4 half-tribulation Immortal Realm experts secretly mobilized the law of destruction they had comprehended. Blue Dragon, your strength can reach the peak of the Immortal Level 1 with just your projection. I guess your cultivation base will be able to reach the Immortal Level 3 soon, right? Xingtian Supreme wasn't angry at Blue Dragon Supreme's sinister intention. Instead, he chuckled lightly. Then, he used the feeling he got from the fight just now to point out his opponent's cultivation base and destroy the 8 half-tribulation Immortal Realm experts' hope of joining hands. Hearing Xingtian Supreme's introduction of Blue Dragon Supreme's strength, except for Supreme White Tiger, Supreme Vermilion Bird, and Supreme Black Tortoise, the remaining 5 half-tribulation Immortal Realm experts not only showed fear in their eyes, but also subconsciously kept a distance from Blue Dragon Supreme. After all, compared to Xingtian Supreme, who had been sealed all this time, Blue Dragon Supreme, who had been communicating with them all this time, had only shown the strength of an early stage 2 tribulation Immortal Realm expert. So, why did he deliberately hide his cultivation base? Xingtian Supreme's fierce counterattack made Blue Dragon Supreme's face turn gloomy instantly. He glanced at Supreme Laozi and the others who had retreated 10,000 meters. After a trace of anger flashed in his eyes, he turned his head and ordered Supreme White Tiger, Supreme Vermilion Bird, and Supreme Black Tortoise. Formation! Woo! Hearing Blue Dragon Supreme's order, Supreme White Tiger raised his head and roared. Then, he crossed the barrier of time and space and instantly appeared in the west of Xingtian Supreme. Caw! Supreme Vermilion Bird raised his head and cried. Then, he instantly appeared in the south of Xingtian Supreme. Sizzle! Supreme Black Tortoise lowered his head and roared. Then, he instantly appeared in the north of Xingtian Supreme. In the Sea of Consciousness. After 3 minutes, the blood-void beast finally calmed down and returned to the center of the Sea of Consciousness. You Howren, Violet Spirit, keep these innate crystals to improve your cultivation base and strength. Seeing that you Howren and Violet Spirit were willing to take out the innate crystals to improve the cultivation base and strength of the life calamity spirit rats, the blood-void beast's attitude had completely changed. He took out 15 innate crystals from the independent space and suggested with a smile, "I'll pay for the innate crystals to help the life calamity spirit rats. Senior Blood-Void, what are your conditions?" The fact that the blood-void beast could secretly recover the cultivation base and strength of a peak 9th grade Supreme under the strict surveillance of Blue Dragon Supreme was enough to prove its shrewdness and cunning. Then, the number of innate crystals that it had secretly collected and accumulated over the years was definitely more than the 20 that he had given him at the beginning. Chapter 1974. In the Blue Dragon Clan's encampment, in the Sea of Consciousness. Through the barrier of the Sea of Consciousness, the blood-void beast looked at the projections of the 4 divine beasts who were about to form a formation. You Howren, my request is the same as Zling's. When the life-stealing spiritual rat has the ability to control the fate of half-tribulation immortal experts, it will help me control the fate of the blue dragon, the white tiger, the vermilion bird, and the black tortoise so that I can take my revenge. No problem. It seemed that Blue Dragon Supreme had saved the blood-void beast, who was on the verge of death, but in fact, he was very insidious. Not only did he use special means to prevent the blood-void beast from absorbing the rule of space between heaven and earth, but he also treated the blood-void beast as a watchdog of the clan's treasury. As a connate spiritual beast born from the blood origin, the blood-void beast was not afraid of the time and space victor, a connate spiritual beast born from the chaos. How could it bear such contempt and humiliation? Therefore, after thinking carefully for a while, Yuhauran nodded and agreed to the blood-void beast's request. He also took 15 connate crystals from the blood-void beast. Then, he used half of his energy to set up a formation to transform chaos spiritual chi in his heart with the 5 connate crystals, so that the life-stealing spiritual rat could improve its cultivation and strength quickly. The other half of his energy was focused on Xingtian Supreme, who was fighting against the projections of the 4 divine beasts. As the creators of the 4 symbols God Suppression formation, the Azure Dragon Exalted, White Tiger Exalted, Vermilion Bird Exalted and Black Tortoise Exalted's projections were not only extremely powerful, but their might was also heaven-defying. Even though he had the strength of a peak immortal expert and a body defense that was not weaker than the 12 ancestors of ancient sorcerers, Xingtian Supreme was gradually at an absolute disadvantage under the cover of the formation set up by the 4 divine beasts. However, Yuhauran could faintly sense that Supreme Xingtian wasn't flustered or irritable in the face of an absolute disadvantage. Instead, he was intentionally suppressing his strength, as if he was waiting for the best opportunity to counterattack. And the result was just as he had guessed. At the moment when the White Tiger Sovereign was using the advantage of the spirit formation to leave behind a 2-meter-deep wound on Utmost Heaven Punisher's chest, Utmost Heaven Punisher, who had been in a defensive posture the entire time, suddenly unleashed his aura. Then, he extended his hand and pointed at the White Tiger Sovereign's projection. Destroy! With Xingtian Supreme's soft cry, an extremely peculiar pulse of energy not only transcended the barriers of space and time, but it also directly passed through the defensive energy condensed by the formation. Afterwards, it shot towards the White Tiger Supreme's colossal body. There was neither a howl of pain nor a violent struggle. The supreme projection of the White Tiger, which was 1,000,000 meters tall, burst like a bubble. This is a law martial technique condensed from the power of laws. Supreme Laozi, who was experienced and knowledgeable, couldn't help but yell out when he saw the peculiar energy that easily shattered the projection of the white tiger. Hearing Supreme Laozi's yell, Supreme Underworld Ancestor, Supreme Illusory Void, Old Man Fuxing, and Old Man Duyuan's expressions also changed as they retreated several thousand meters. Supreme Blue Dragon, Supreme Vermilion Bird, and Supreme Black Tortoise immediately withdrew the formation that they could no longer set up and looked at Xingtian Supreme with gloomy faces. A projection, especially a projection that was exactly the same as the real body, not only did it require the cultivation base and strength of the half-tribulation immortal realm, but it also consumed half of one's divine power and soul power, 1/3 of one's essence blood, and 1/4 of one's comprehension of rule power. Although the destruction of the projection wouldn't affect the foundation of half-tribulation immortal realm, it would cause their overall strength to drop in a short time. Especially when the Destiny's Child, Destiny Steel, and Destiny Calamity Spirit Rat had all been born, a drop in strength was equivalent to giving up the only chance to reach the immortal realm in the immeasurable calamity. After easily killing the projection of the white tiger, Xingtian Supreme glanced at the projections of the 8 half-tribulation immortal realm experts and finally stopped at Illusory Void, Old Man Fuxing, and Old Man Duyuan. He slowly raised his arm. Xingtian, stop. Illusory Void, Old Man Fuxing, and Old Man Duyuan immediately became nervous when they saw that Xingtian Supreme's next target was them. However, the fear in their eyes was enough to show that they didn't have the confidence to resist a law martial technique condensed from the power of laws. However, just as Xingtian Sovereign was about to unleash a destructive law-related martial technique, the Azure Dragon Sovereign, whose face had gradually regained its calm, shouted out to stop him. Xingtian Supreme turned his head to look at Blue Dragon Supreme, whose expression had returned to normal, and sneered, "Blue Dragon Supreme, could it be that you want to experience the power of a law martial technique in advance?" Xingtian Supreme, if you want to use a law martial technique condensed from the power of laws, not only will it weaken your comprehension of the power of laws of destruction, but it will also consume the strength that you have painstakingly recovered. Facing Xingtian Supreme's threat, Blue Dragon Supreme smiled and reminded him without any fear. Although the destruction of the projection will cause our strength to drop in a short time, the profound foundation that we have accumulated over countless years allows us to ignore any damage and influence caused by the destruction of the projection. Blue Dragon Supreme, what are you trying to say? Xingtian Supreme was very confused by Blue Dragon Supreme's reminder that he wasn't a match for a law martial technique, but he wasn't afraid of the threat at all. Since our projections can't do anything to you, and our true bodies can't descend to the Tianxian continent for some special reason, it means that our plan to reseal you is basically a complete failure. Seeing Xingtian Sovereign slowly lower his arm after hearing his explanation, the Azure Dragon Sovereign secretly let out a sigh of relief. At the same time, he rapidly shrunk his enormous body. When he was only 100 meters tall, he directly transformed into a middle-aged man wearing an azure Taoist robe. At the same time, Vermilion Bird Supreme and Black Tortoise Supreme also shrunk their bodies and transformed into a woman in a red dress and an old man in a gray robe. Brother Xingtian, with your current cultivation and strength, apart from those old fellows whose whereabouts are unknown, I'm afraid that no one can harm you. Therefore, we're willing to offer enough sincerity to make up for the sins we committed against you during the Middle Ages. At this point, Blue Dragon Supreme suddenly shut his mouth and began to discuss the compensation plan with Xingtian Supreme through divine telekinesis. Chapter 1975. Inside the residence of the Blue Dragon Clan. Seeing the gazes of the Azure Dragon Sovereign and the Illusory Void Sovereign on him from time to time, and at the same time, feeling the killing intent and baleful aura of the heavenly punishment sovereign gradually weaken, a trace of a bad feeling gradually surged into his heart. Senior Blood Void, please come into my sea of consciousness for the time being. The bad feeling in his heart made the cautious Yuhauran contact his second doppelganger and long-armed ape, who had already arrived at White Bone City, while turning his head to instruct the Blood Void beast. Got it. The Blood Void beast did not ask for the specific reason. After nodding in response, it directly entered Yuhauran's sea of consciousness. After ending the telepathy with his second doppelganger, Yuhauran secretly mobilized the power of the law of space, which was about to advance to the occult, and used the Earth elemental bead to leave a spatial coordinate at 10,000 meters, 50,000 meters, 100,000 meters, and 1,000,000 meters, respectively. Okay. I promise you. After nearly 5 minutes of bargaining, Xingtian Supreme also dispelled his ancestral wizard transformation and nodded in agreement to the compensation proposed by Blue Dragon Supreme and the others. Thaling, what happens next will certainly make you very sad and disappointed, but I hope you can control your emotions as much as possible. Don't do anything impulsive. Seeing Xingtian Supreme nod in agreement to the compensation proposed by Blue Dragon Supreme and the others, Yuhauran knew that the development of the situation had deviated from his expectations. While his heart sank to the bottom, he gloomily reminded Thaling, who was still immersed in sorrow, in his sea of consciousness. Yuhauran, what's wrong? Yuhauran's baffling reminder made Thaling quickly recover from his sorrow. His eyes were filled with confusion as he immediately asked. The development of the situation is beyond our expectations. I'm afraid we'll have to fight with our lives on the line. Looking up at the 8 half-tribulation immortal experts looking at him, Yuhauran's eyes gradually burned with anger as he replied. Looking at the blue-clothed youth glaring at him, Blue Dragon Supreme asked with a smile, "Young man, are you called Yuhauran?" "That's right." Yuhauran nodded and replied. "Clean up all living things within 10,000 meters and use the power of the law to completely seal time and space." After receiving a confirmation from Yuhauran, Blue Dragon Supreme turned his head and ordered Supreme Vermilion Bird Supreme and Black Tortoise Supreme. "Yes." Supremacy Vermilion Bird nodded in response. Supremacy Vermilion Bird was in charge of cleaning up all living beings that possessed life auras, while Supremacy Black Tortoise was in charge of setting up the law formation to seal time and space. When the Vermilion Bird Sovereign and the Black Tortoise Sovereign returned to the Azure Dragon Sovereign's side, he glanced at the location of Yuhauran's heart and continued to ask with a smile. "Yuhauran, are you the child of destiny?" Yuhauran's expression couldn't help but change when he heard Blue Dragon Supreme directly pointing out his true identity. He immediately wanted to activate the escape plan he had prepared in advance. Fortunately, his valiant mental state cultivation, as well as his impatient desire to know the plans of the Azure Dragon Sovereign and the others, allowed him to suppress the thoughts of escaping. After taking a deep breath and mobilizing a trace of the aura of destiny in his heart, Yuhauran nodded and admitted, "That's right. I'm the child of destiny who can start and end the immeasurable calamity." Although they could vaguely sense a trace of destiny aura from Yuhauran with their half-tribulation immortal realm strength, they still couldn't be 100% sure that Yuhauran was the child of destiny. After all, some monstrous geniuses who could comprehend the auxiliary power of the law of destiny could also emit the aura of destiny. It was just that the aura of destiny wasn't as strong. Now, after receiving Yuhauran's acknowledgement and the fact that Yuhauran had activated the unique destiny aura of Destiny's Child, Azure Dragon and the other 6 half-tribulation immortal realm supremes were pleasantly surprised. Only Supreme Lao Zi, who already knew that Yuhauran was the child of destiny, was relatively calm. After taking a deep breath and forcibly suppressing the pleasant surprise in his heart, Blue Dragon Supreme continued to ask with an expectant and nervous look in his eyes. "Child of destiny, have the Destiny Steel and Destiny Calamity Spirit Rat recognized you as their master? Since he had already confessed his identity as the child of Destiny, he didn't care about revealing the existence of the Destiny Steel and Destiny Calamity Spirit Rat. Therefore, Yuhauran didn't hide anything and nodded. That's right. The Destiny Steel and Destiny Calamity Spirit Rat have already recognized me as their master. If Yuhauran's admission of his identity as the child of Destiny had made Blue Dragon and the other Supremes happy, then the Destiny Calamity Spirit Rat and Destiny Calamity Spirit Rat were happy. Blue Dragon, Lousy, and the other Supremes were wild with joy when he took the initiative to admit that the Destiny Steel and Destiny Calamity Spirit Rat had recognized him as their master. Child of Destiny, as long as you are willing to become a member of the Guardian families, I, Blue Dragon Supreme, solemnly promise you that not only will you become the patriarch of the 4 Guardian families, but you will also become the one and only overlord of the Tianxian continent. As the strongest half-tribulation immortal expert present, Blue Dragon Supreme was the first to calm down from his wild joy. He took the initiative to offer an offer that ordinary people wouldn't be able to refuse. Supreme Lao Zi, who came back to his senses, promised with a gentle expression. Little friend you, as long as you are willing to become my legacy disciple, I will not only impart my Pill Tao to you without reservation, but I will also do my best to help you reach the one tribulation immortal realm within 100 years. Supreme Underworld Ancestor, who came back to his senses right after Supreme Lao Zi, patted his chest and promised. Child of Destiny, as long as you are willing to become my legacy disciple, although I can't teach you the profound Pill Tao, I can teach you the complete Slaughter Tao. At the same time, you can also use the essence of the Blood Sea to reach the one tribulation immortal realm within 50 years. Illusory Void Supreme, Old Man Fu Xing, and Old Man Du Yuan all made promises that ordinary people wouldn't be able to refuse. If it had been someone else, such as the fake child of Destiny Ji Xing, who was facing these half-tribulation immortal experts who could suppress spirits of 3 extinguishers and heaven's expectation, they would have been wild with joy and agreed immediately. However, Yuhauran didn't agree immediately. Instead, his face was so gloomy that it seemed like it could drip water. 2 questions. After Old Man Du Yuan made his final promise, Yuhauran took a deep breath and tried his best to calm down the complicated situation in his heart. Then, he calmly extended 2 fingers. Please ask. Supreme Blue Dragon said politely. First question. What do you want me to do with the generous promise that ordinary people wouldn't be able to refuse? Supreme Blue Dragon's eyes flashed with a hint of hesitation when he heard Yuhauran's first question. After a short conversation with Supreme Vermilion Bird, Supreme Black Tortoise, and the other 5 half-tribulation immortal experts, he answered truthfully. Chapter 1976. Within the Blue Dragon Clan's encampment. In the beginning of the immeasurable calamity, not only would the aura of destiny from the dead not dissipate, but it would also gather in the Destiny Stone Steel. Destiny's child would then choose an expert suitable to bear all the aura of destiny, and through the Destiny Calamity Spirit Mouse's control over the aura of destiny would be bestowed upon that person. In this way, the expert who was supported by the aura of destiny from countless lives would not only become invincible, but also have an easier time obtaining the opportunity to break through to the immortal realm. This was a secret that Yuhauran already knew when he received the Destiny Stone Steel's memories. However, he already had a suitable candidate in mind for the person to bear the aura of destiny, so it was impossible for him to agree to the promises and requests of Blue Dragon and the others. Thus, Yuhauran withdrew a finger and continued asking, "And if I don't agree?" Whether it's the identity of Destiny's child, or the ownership of the Destiny Stone Steel and the Destiny Calamity Spirit Mouse, they can all be exchanged and transferred. Thus, my young friend, it's best that you consider carefully before making your final choice. Faced with Yu Haoran's second question, Blue Dragon put away the smile on his face and threatened with a cold expression. I understand. After nodding to indicate that he understood, Yu Haoran looked at Xingtian Supreme, his eyes revealing a final look of expectation as he asked. Xingtian Supreme, this junior hopes to obtain your opinion? This matter has nothing to do with me, Xingtian. You don't need to ask for my opinion at all. Xingtian Supreme's expression was cold as he expressed his attitude. Xingtian, what did you just say? When Blue Dragon and the others had questioned and promised, Xingtian Supreme's silence had already made Thaling feel that something was not quite right. Now, in the face of Yu Haoran's implied request for help, his answer was to stand by and do nothing. This made Thaling unable to believe it, and she couldn't help but angrily ask after leaving the sea of consciousness. Faced with Thaling's angry question, Xingtian Supreme's expression was still indifferent as he replied, Violet Spirit, I won't interfere with anything related to destiny. Won't interfere with anything related to destiny. After repeating Xingtian Supreme's answer, Thaling walked step by step toward Xingtian Supreme and questioned him word by word. Xingtian, did you have a conscience when you answered this question? If Yu Haoran hadn't taken the risk to remove the seal of the world-suppressing bronze seal, would have been able to break free. If Yu Haoran hadn't reminded you to quickly devour those Heavenly Alliance experts and told me to seal the large number of divine veins under the mountain range, would you have been able to quickly recover your strength and potential? If it weren't for Yu Haoran risking his life to fend off those peak supremes who wanted to kill you in the endless void, would you have been able to recover to the peak of immortal realm with the help of the destructive power contained in the space turbulence? In the face of Thaling's aggressive questioning, Xingtian Supreme's rhetorical question immediately rendered him speechless. Violet Spirit, did I beg him to do this? You! Not only was he speechless, but he also couldn't believe it. This made Thaling so angry that he didn't know what to say or what to criticize. He never thought that Xingtian would have such a shameless side to him. Violet Spirit, the calamity that befell us during the Middle Ages made me, Xingtian, understand one thing. In this mortal world, there is no such thing as hatred for no reason, and there is no such thing as love for no reason. Ignoring Thaling's anger, Xingtian Supreme continued speaking in a cold tone. This guy tried his best to help me get out of trouble and recover to the peak of immortal realm. Not only because of you, Violet Spirit Supreme, but also because he wants to draw me, Xingtian Supreme Divine Bloodline 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 Divine Bloodline. Xingtian, you've changed. Facing Xingtian's self-righteous thoughts, Thaling suddenly felt that the person in front of him was completely different from the Xingtian who was obsessed with martial arts in the Middle Ages and was willing to give up everything in order to reach the peak of martial arts. Violet Spirit, if you've been beheaded and suppressed for countless years, I'm afraid you'll change too. After withdrawing his gaze from Yu Haoran, Xingtian Supreme looked at Thaling, who looked lonely, and replied as if he was talking to a stranger. Thaling, come back. Xingtian's rebuttal and questioning had completely replaced the expectation in Yu Haoran's eyes with disappointment. At the same time, he had a thorough understanding of the nature of some of the top experts in the ancient and medieval times. Therefore, although he was very disappointed, he wasn't too angry in his heart. Alas! The tower spirit looked up at Xingtian Supreme, who was completely different from what it remembered. It sighed and didn't continue to question him. Instead, it turned back to Yu Haoran with an apologetic look in its eyes. Yu Haoran, I'm sorry. It's all because of my selfishness. If it weren't for his request and insistence, Yuhauran wouldn't have dissolved the formula Tao energy in the world-suppressing bronze seal, nor would he have willingly offered a dozen divine veins, nor would he have offended so many peak supremes in the endless void. Thaling, how can you be blamed for this? Yuhauran comforted and mocked as he gestured for Thaling to return to the sea of consciousness. After all, countless years have passed. You don't know that some people's conscience has been eaten by dogs, and you don't know that some people have fallen to the point where they're even worse than livestock. Kid, you're courting death. After hearing Yuhauran's sarcasm, Xingtian Supreme immediately exuded a strong murderous aura. In response, Yuhauran ignored it and looked up at Blue Dragon Supreme and the others. I can agree to your promises and requests, but you have to agree to one of my requests. Say it. Originally, it was a good thing that Yuhauran was willing to take the initiative to negotiate, but Blue Dragon Supreme had a bad feeling in his heart. And the truth was just as he felt. Yuhauran pointed at Xingtian Supreme and demanded with a smile on his face, I'll agree to whoever can kill the ungrateful Xingtian Supreme for me. Facing Xingtian Supreme, who had successfully comprehended the law of destruction, even if his main body descended, he might not be able to kill him smoothly. In other words, although Yuhauran's request seemed to be a negotiation, it was actually no different from a categorical rejection. Therefore, Blue Dragon Supreme and the other 6 half-tribulation, immortal experts were already prepared to carry out the plan to replace Destiny's child. Only Lousy Supreme's eyes flashed with a hint of hesitation. A bunch of cowards who are greedy for life and afraid of death. After ridiculing with a disdainful expression, Yuhauran waved his hand to bid farewell to the Azure Dragon Sovereign and the others. Chapter 1977. Inside the residence of the Blue Dragon family. You want to leave? Seeing Yuhauran waving goodbye to them, the 7 half-tribulation immortal realm experts, including Blue Dragon, immediately tried to stop him. Even Xingtian Supreme, who was filled with killing intent, also tried to stop him. However, when their attacks penetrated Yuhauran's body, they realized that it was just a shadow. What a cunning brat! The Azure Dragon Sovereign gnashed his teeth as he looked at the illusory figure that had shattered like a bubble. 100,000 miles to the southeast. Through the defensive formation he had set up beforehand, Black Tortoise Prime was the first to sense where Yuhauran had disappeared. Without any hesitation, the 7 half-tribulation immortal realm experts, including Blue Dragon and Xingtian Supreme, instantly disappeared into the void of the mountain range. Only Lousy stayed where he was and didn't chase after him. Looking at the place where Yuhauran had been standing, Lousy muttered to himself with a complicated expression. How can the child of destiny, who has accumulated the providence of the ancient era, middle era, late era, and modern era, be so easily controlled and replaced? Since destiny has chosen Yuhauran to be the child of destiny who starts and ends the immeasurable calamity, it must have given him a fortune that far surpasses the children of destiny of the ancient era, middle era, and near era. How can he fall so easily? Lousy muttered to himself and turned his head to look at the prince's mansion above Feng Run City in the eastern region. His eyes were filled with anticipation and nervousness. Using the prearranged space coordinates and the Earth Elemental Pearl, Yuhauran went through the underground space that was not restricted by the defensive formation. He appeared on top of a mountain that was 100,000 miles away from the mountain range. After taking a short breath, he immediately used the method of merging his main body and doppelganger to appear in the center of Bone City. After instructing his second clone and the long-armed ape to enter the victor in his sea of consciousness, Yuhauran purposely left behind a trace of his own aura and used the Earth Elemental Pearl to quickly dive into the ground. Just as his body dived into the ground, a terrifying aura that made his soul tremble almost made him flee back to the surface. Fortunately, he could sense the rapid approach of Blue Dragon and the other half-tribulation immortal realm experts through the spatial coordinates. he had left 1,000,000 meters away. He forcibly suppressed the fear in his heart and continued to dive deeper into the ground. One of the 10 great forbidden grounds of the profound sky continent, White Bone City. When the azure dragon sovereign arrived before the city that was filled with white bones, a sliver of fear flashed through his eyes as he gave an introduction. Could it be the Bone King's place of cultivation? Xingtian Supreme, who vaguely felt a familiar aura fluctuation from the city in front of him, asked with a hint of fear in his eyes. That's right. Old man Fu Xing, who had taken over the topic of Blue Dragon, nodded and confirmed it with a solemn expression. Bone King has been sleeping under this city ever since he suffered unimaginable damage during the end of the Middle Ages. I wonder if he has recovered the strength of the peak of the One Tribulation Immortal Realm. Creak, creak, creak. Just as old man Fu Xing finished speaking, a hair-raising bone-grinding sound came from the underground of Bone City. Let's go. Even if Bone King has recovered the strength of the peak of the One Tribulation Immortal Realm, he will definitely restrain himself when facing 8 experts of the same level as us. The sound of bones grinding meant that the Bone King was waking up from his slumber. Blue Dragon hurriedly suggested to the people behind him. He wanted to capture Yuhauran alive as soon as possible, but he was also worried that Bone King would accidentally kill Yuhauran. In response, the people present followed Blue Dragon into Bone City without hesitation. Countless skeletons, which were supposed to kill all the creatures in the city, sensed the 8 half-tribulation Immortal Realm experts intruding into the city. Instead of waking up to kill them, the soul fires in their skulls floated out and quickly merged into the underground of the city. 900 meters. When he dived 900 meters underground, Yuhauran immediately heard the sound of bones rubbing against each other, which made his divine soul tremble. Although Thaling and the Blood-Void Beast had advised him to hide in the Spacetime Victor, Yuhauran, who had his own plan, suppressed the fear in his heart and continued to dive deeper underground. 3,600 meters. At this moment, the bone-grinding sound not only made Yuhauran's divine soul vaguely feel the pain of being torn apart in his sea of consciousness space, but also the terrifying killing intent gushing out of the underground made his body bear the impact of being on the verge of collapse. Taking risks was not the same as courting death. Since his divine soul and body had reached the point where they could not bear it anymore, Yuhauran did not continue to take risks. Instead, he stayed where he was and used his divine mind and the power of the law of space to set up 9 space coordinates in different positions. Then, with the help of the bone grinding and the impact of the killing intent, he tried his best to strengthen his divine soul and body. Blue Dragon requests to see Bone King Supreme. Just when Yuhauran was trying his best to strengthen his divine soul and body, he suddenly heard the voice of Blue Dragon transmitted by the power of the law of space. Yuhauran, get out of here quickly! The tower spirit, who was already vaguely familiar with the aura emanating from the underground, reminded Hauran with an abrupt change in expression after hearing the Azure Dragon Sovereign's request to meet him and revealing the true identity of the owner of the aura. Thaling, don't worry, I have ways to guard against Bone King Supreme. However, in the face of Thaling's sudden warning, Yuhauran did not leave immediately. Instead, he revealed a confident smile on his face. This was because when he received the memory inheritance from the Destiny Stone Tablet, he accidentally discovered some information about White Bone City, Death Mountain Range, and Death Swamp, which were among the 10 great forbidden places in the Tianxian continent. According to the records in the memory inheritance, not only did he know the true origin of White Bone City, but he also understood one of Bone King Supreme's fatal weaknesses. This was also the real reason why he had arranged for the long-armed ape to bring his second clone to White Bone City. He needed to make use of the Bone King's fatal weakness to deal with the Azure Dragon Sovereign and the others, while also completely transforming his own soul. Knowing that Yuhauran was a cautious person, Thaling did not persuade him too much. However, in order to prevent unpredictable accidents, Phalanx secretly prepared a defense and escape method in advance with the Blood Void Beast. Blue Dragon Supreme, you and I did not have much interaction during the Middle Ages. May I know why you are looking for me this time? Bone King Supreme, who had completely awakened, needed some time to get used to his body and the soul fire in his head. Chapter 1978. Inside Bone City. Senior Bone King, the human brat we're chasing just hid in the white Bone City you created, the Bone King said. Knowing that Bone King was a man who cared a lot about his reputation, Blue Dragon tried his best to show his respect for Bone King. At the same time, he explained why they were in Bone City. That's why we need to ask for your permission in advance before we can use our divine sense to locate that brat and capture him. Haha. To be able to obtain the respect of a top powerhouse like the Azure Dragon Sovereign, the Bone King felt extremely pleased as he laughed heartily. After laughing for nearly 10 seconds, the Bone King's supremacy stopped laughing and nodded in agreement to the Azure Dragon Supremacy's request. Thank you for your understanding, Senior. Sorry for the offense. After getting Bone King's approval, Sovereign Azure Dragon's eyes flashed with joy. He hurriedly mobilized his Peak 1 Tribulation Immortal Realm Spirit Sense and scanned every nook and cranny of White Bone City. However, he found nothing. Senior, Blue Dragon suspects that the human brat is hiding in the underground space where you're cultivating, so, thinking about how Howren had used the method of passing through the ground to avoid the defensive formation that the Black Tortoise Sovereign had set up beforehand, the Azure Dragon Sovereign seriously suspected that Howren was hiding in the ground where the Bone King resided. Therefore, when the Azure Dragon Sovereign cupped his hands and requested to inspect the underground space, he was interrupted by the Bone King Sovereign, who rejected his request. No. The underground space is where I'm cultivating. How can I allow you to spy on it? Senior, please don't misunderstand. Sovereign Azure Dragon hurriedly explained when he saw Sovereign Bone King's sudden rage. Blue Dragon doesn't want to spy on where you're cultivating. I just want you to help me find that human brat. If that human brat isn't hiding in the underground space, we'll leave Bone City immediately. We won't disturb your cultivation any longer. If that human brat is hiding in the underground space, we'll have to trouble you to force him out. Then we'll capture him ourselves. At least you know your place. Upon hearing Sovereign Blue Dragon's suggestion, Sovereign Bone King nodded in satisfaction and began to use his consciousness to investigate. Spatial fusion. Howren, who had been paying close attention to the conversation between Supreme Blue Dragon and Supreme Bone King, immediately activated the 9 spatial coordinates that he had set up beforehand when he heard that Supreme Bone King was willing to use his divine sense to completely clear the underground space. Using the method of overlapping space, he narrowly avoided Supreme Bone King's careless divine sense. At the same time, he also used his 10 fingers to form a seal to activate the weak aura that he had left in the ground. Supreme Blue Dragon, I've already carefully inspected the underground space. I didn't find any traces of humans. You may leave White Bone City now. The Bone King's Supremacy instructed the Azure Dragon Supremacy with an arrogant look on his face after his spirit sense failed to obtain anything. Supreme Blue Dragon, who had accidentally sensed a trace of Howren's aura in the ground, asked with a gloomy face. Senior Bone King, are you sure you've already carefully inspected the underground space with your divine sense? Blue Dragon, what do you mean? Supreme Bone King asked in an unfriendly tone after hearing Supreme Blue Dragon's question. Bone King, don't be so shameless. We've already clearly sensed a trace of that human brat's aura in the underground space, but now you're telling us that you didn't find him? Do you take us for fools? You talk too much. They already knew about Supreme Bone King's sinister intentions, yet they were still questioning him. This made the violent and bloodthirsty Xingtian Supreme impatient, so he directly punched the ground of the city. Success. Seeing Xingtian Supreme take the initiative to attack, Yu Haoran's eyes flashed with joy. He immediately flashed into the spacetime Victor, and let Thaling control the Victor to go deeper into the ground. Although Xingtian Supreme didn't use any rule martial technique, as a Peak 1 Tribulation Immortal Realm expert with the strongest ancestral Magus body, his punch had created a 10,000-meter deep hole in the ground of the city. At the same time, Thaling successfully avoided Supreme Bone King's detection with the help of the energy waves created by the punch. He smoothly entered a space filled with colorful soulfire. This is... When Yu Haoran saw the mysterious bronze coffin in the center of the soulfire space, a trace of doubt appeared in his eyes. This was because the bronze coffin in the soulfire space was exactly the same as the one on the third floor of the Blue Dragon family's treasury. Yu Haoran, one of the 3 half-tribulation immortal Buddha lords of Buddhism in the Middle Ages, used the green void bronze soul stone to refine 3 bronze coffins with different effects. Seeing Yu Haoran's puzzled look when he stared at the bronze coffins in the soulfire space, Thaling took the initiative to explain before he asked. One of the bronze coffins is called the World-Suppressing Bronze. It's a sealing treasure specially used to suppress the top experts. The other one is called the Soul-Gathering Bronze. It's used to gather the divine soul fragments of the fallen martial gods, supreme masters, and half-tribulation immortal realm experts and transform them into the purest divine soul origin energy. The last one is called the Luck Bronze. It's used to gather all kinds of luck in the world and is used as a guarding treasure of Buddhism. Unfortunately, when the Middle Ages were destroyed, the Inheritance Bronze was smashed by a terrifying force that appeared out of nowhere. This led to the complete decline of Buddhism, and now it's just a small power in a remote corner. One of the bronze coffins was smashed by force when the Middle Ages were destroyed, and the other one was used to suppress and seal the headless Xingtian Supreme. Therefore, there was no need to continue guessing. The bronze coffin in the soulfire space must be the soul-gathering bronze that could gather the divine soul fragments. Therefore, what Yu Haoran wanted to know the most now was whether the divine soul origin energy transformed by the soul-gathering bronze could be used to enhance his divine soul realm. What do you think? Thaling could not help but roll his eyes at Yu Haoran. Ha ha! After laughing complacently, Yu Haoran did not even pay attention to the soulfires of the martial gods, supreme masters, and half-tribulation immortal realm experts floating in the soulfire space. He just stared at the bronze coffin in front of him. Chapter 1979. In White Bone City. Xingtian Supreme, you're courting death. Bone King had made his name during the reign of the ancient gods and demons. He had attained his Tao at the beginning of the Middle Ages. On the day of the Tao conquest, Xingtian Supreme was just an ordinary warrior who had been looked down upon by others. A junior who had once looked up to him dared to take the initiative to attack him. How could Bone King, who cared about his reputation, not feel angry? Bone King roared. Without leaving the soul-gathering bronze, he used a soulfire of the half-tribulation immortal realm in the soulfire space to condense a huge bone palm. He slapped it toward Xingtian Supreme, who was above White Bone City. Mountain-suppressing fist. The bone palm condensed from the one tribulation immortal realm soulfire was powerful, but not powerful enough to scare him. Therefore, Xingtian Supreme did not use the martial technique he had comprehended from the rule of law. Instead, he used the martial technique he had inherited from the ancestor wizard bloodline. Boom! The iron fist and the huge palm collided with each other. A deafening boom resounded. Accompanied by a deafening boom, the iron fist formed by the fist-suppressing mountains was sent flying back, causing Xingtian Sovereign to take half a step back. The huge bone palm condensed from the soulfire space broke into countless tiny soulfire space and scattered on the bones of White Bone City. Looks like I've underestimated you. Seeing the bone palm condensed from the one tribulation, immortal realm soul fire being smashed by an ordinary fist skill, Bone King stopped looking down on Jian Wushuang and slowly opened the soul-gathering bronze coffin. Then, a pure white skeleton slowly stood up from the soul-gathering bronze. This. A trace of doubt flashed through Yu Haoran's eyes as he looked at the jade-like sparkling and translucent white skeleton and the bean-sized gray soul fire in the skeleton's skull. According to the normal evolution of bone spirits, the skeleton and soul fire of a bone spirit at the level of Bone King should have a 9-colored supreme jade skeleton of the supreme realm. At the same time, the soul fire should have filled the entire skull. What a powerful supreme Bone King! When Thaling saw Bone King standing up from the soul-condensing bronze, his expression was filled with admiration. "Thaling, what's going on?" Yu Haoran hurriedly asked when he heard Thaling's admiring sigh. "Return to the origin." Thaling only replied with one sentence, and Yu Haoran knew why the Bone King's bone body and soul fire were different from the normal bone spirits. At the same time, his eyes were filled with admiration and worry. Returning to the origin meant returning everything to its original state. In other words, Bone King was willing to give up on reaching the pinnacle of the Tao of bone cultivation, allowing his body to grow flesh and blood, and allowing his soul fire to nurture his 3 souls and 7 spirits. However, according to the inheritance of the Destiny Stone Steel, one had to be at least at the peak of the second tribulation, immortal realm, in order to make his bone body and soul fire return to the origin. In other words, the seemingly ordinary Bone King was actually a terrifying expert who had reached the peak of the second tribulation, immortal realm. Therefore, the projections of the 7 half-tribulation, immortal realm experts and Xingtian Supreme, who was at the peak of the first tribulation, immortal realm, were probably no match for Bone King. If Bone King hadn't suffered an irreparable injury, how would he have been able to seize the soul-gathering bronze that transformed the soul origin? How would he have taken advantage of the weakness recorded in the Destiny Stone Steel's memory inheritance to seize the soul fire of the supreme treasure in his head? After leaving the soul-condensing bronze, Bone King didn't leave the soul fire space immediately. Instead, he sucked out a child-sized 9-colored supreme skeleton from a corner of the space. "Soul, come here." He waved his hand at one immortal realm soul fire, 9 soul fires from the 1st grade to the 9th grade sovereign realm, and 18 soul fires from the 1st grade to the 9th grade martial god realm. Then, the 28 soul fires floated in front of Bone King. Without the slightest delay, the 28 soul fires merged under the Bone King's special seal and finally condensed into a soul fire that emitted 9 colors. Then, Bone King reached out his pale bony hand and grabbed the 9-colored soul fire, then pressed it into the skull of 9-colored Supreme's skeleton. "Kill them all," Bone King ordered in a sinister tone as he tossed the corpse of the 9-colored sovereign out of the ground. "Xingtian and the others are in danger." Thaling reminded them with a hint of worry in his eyes when he saw 9-colored Supreme's skeleton being thrown out of the ground by Bone King. Yu Haoran shook his head helplessly and didn't say anything. "Be careful. That's an early stage 2 tribulation, immortal realm supreme bone spirit." The moment Bone King Sovereign threw 9-colored supreme skeleton out of the ground, Azure Dragon Sovereign, whose cultivation base had reached the pinnacle of the second tribulation immortal realm, immediately sensed the true cultivation base and strength of 9-colored Supreme's skeleton and hurriedly reminded everyone to be careful. Hearing Blue Dragon Supreme's warning, everyone's expression changed slightly. Then, they began to perform their strongest means. Blue Dragon Supreme took out a jade pendant carved with a white tiger. He activated the jade pendant with the power of rule and transformed it into a supreme shadow of white tiger at the peak of the 9th grade supreme realm. Then, he quickly set up the 4 symbols God-suppressing formation. Yuanshi Supreme, who was known as the number 1 formation master of the Middle Ages, immediately took out 9 supreme formation flags and inserted them into 9 fatal acupoints of his projected body. Then, his projected body gradually became illusory and finally disappeared above Bone City. Fu Xing Laozi, who was known as the number 1 talisman formation master of the Middle Ages, immediately waved his sleeves and threw out tens of thousands of talismans that emitted a strong aura. Duyuan Laozi, who was known as the number 1 poison formation master of the Middle Ages, took out 18 red and black elixirs that emitted a tempting aroma. Then, he opened his mouth and swallowed all of them. His cultivation had reached the peak of the One Tribulation immortal realm. As for Xingtian Supreme, who was known as the strongest supreme of the Middle Ages, he put his hands behind his back. His aura was as calm as a lake as he looked at 9-colored Supreme's skeleton that rushed out of the ground. Since the ancient times, those who have offended me, Bone King Supreme, will either become my people or have their divine souls become the source of energy for my advancement. 9-colored Supreme's skeleton didn't attack immediately. Instead, it glanced at Green Supreme and the others in the air with its hollow eye socket. Finally, it fixed its gaze on Xingtian Supreme. You talk too much. Xingtian Supreme was a bloodthirsty individual, so he was most annoyed by the endless threats that came before a battle. Thus, he let out a cold harumph with disdain before taking the initiative to attack the 9-colored sovereign's corpse. Destroy. Chapter 1980. In White Bone City. So this is why you dared to provoke me. Bone King's mocking voice came from underground as he looked at Xingtian Supreme, who had just used a law martial technique. At the same time, 9-colored Supreme skeleton stretched out his bone hand and grabbed the energy formed by the law martial technique that had appeared in front of him. Bang bang bang! As the bony palm of the 9-colored sovereign's skeleton continued to emit banging sounds, cracks began to appear on the translucent bony palm. 9-colored Supreme skeleton and Bone King didn't care about it at all. However, Xingtian Supreme and Blue Dragon Supreme couldn't help but change their expressions. Even if it was just a projection, the body formed by the combination of divine power, soul power, and essence blood with the law martial technique still had 1/3 of the strength of the original body. After countless years of training in the ancient era, the middle era, and the recent era, White Tiger Supreme had the strength to break through to the Second Tribulation immortal realm. Then, the divine beast body formed by the projection was infinitely close to the peak of the First Tribulation immortal realm. The White Tiger Exalt did not even have the time to dodge or cry out before he was completely annihilated, let alone defend against the heavenly punishment Exalt's law martial skill. Therefore, Old Man Fu Xing and Old Man Duyuan's expressions changed when they saw that 9-colored Supreme skeleton could use the bone palm to resist and weaken the law martial technique's energy. They couldn't help but want to retreat to the endless void. After all, their cultivation and accumulation were far inferior to Blue Dragon Supreme. The destruction of the projection would have a great impact on their original body, which would affect their plan to return to the Tianxian continent in the near future. Destroy! The 9-colored sovereign's corpse roared when it realized that the energy of the bone palm's nomological martial technique couldn't harm the bone palm anymore. Along with the roar, a wisp of green smoke floated out from the gap of the bone palm. Xingtian Supreme took a few steps back abruptly. A trace of fear flashed in his eyes. Twice, 9-colored Supreme skeleton looked up at Xingtian Supreme and said after opening the bone palm, "As the saying goes, don't do things more than 3 times. Now that you've attacked me twice, it's time for me to attack you once." White Bone World. The 9-colored sovereign quickly raised his skeletal palm and aimed it at the heavenly punishing sovereign. The 9-colored sovereign's skeleton stomped on the ground as it let out a soft cry. As the 9-colored sovereign's skeleton cried out, a suction force that didn't seem to be very powerful, but Xing Tian was unable to resist at all, constantly pulled him towards a space of white bones that had been condensed in the palm of the skeleton. If Xingtian Supreme's white bone world is dead, our projections will die. Old Man Fu Sheng and Old Man Duyuan, who was to escape, white bone palm, Old Man Fu Sheng and Old Man Duyuan, who wanted to take the chance to escape. Therefore, we have to work closely together and make sure to attack the nine-colored Supreme Skeleton without any selfish motives. Upon hearing the Azure Dragon Sovereign's reminder, Old Man Fusheng and Old Man Duyuan glanced at each other. They saw a trace of determination in each other's eyes, but in reality, there was a trace of strangeness. They immediately used their strongest means to attack the nine-colored sovereign's court. 1,000 runes and incantations. Poison devours the world. As Old Man Fu Sheng roared, the tens of thousands of runes and incantations that were originally stuck to the corners of White Bone City gathered together and instantly stuck to the nine-colored Supreme's skeleton. As Old Man Duyuan roared, a nine-colored mist emerged from the top of his head and quickly enveloped the nine-colored Supreme's skeleton. Old Man Fu Sheng and Old Man Duyuan took the lead and used their strongest means. This made Blue Dragon let out a long sigh of relief. He immediately activated the four symbols God suppression array that he had just set up and trapped the nine-colored Supreme skeleton in the array. Yuanshi Supreme, who had disappeared from the White Bone City, turned into a huge sword that was also emitting 9 colors. It directly slashed at the corpse of nine-colored supremacy, which was shrouded in the array, smoke, and talismans. Whether it was the array set up by Blue Dragon, Vermilion Bird, or Black Tortoise with the help of the jade pendant of the White Tiger, or the nine-colored giant sword condensed by Illusory Void Supreme's self-created array, their power had already reached the second tribulation immortal realm and could threaten to destroy the nine-colored Supreme's skeleton. Therefore, even though Bone King didn't want to appear in front of Blue Dragon and the others and expose the secret of returning to the origin, he had no choice but to leave the soul-condensing bronze immediately and rush to the ground. Thaling, let's do it. Yu Haoran immediately ordered Thaling, who was in the victor, the moment Bone King rushed out of the soulfire space. However, although Thaling acted quickly, his target wasn't the soul-condensing bronze. Instead, he deliberately chose the soulfires of the martial gods and supremes floating in the soulfire space. Thaling, what are you doing? Yu Haoran asked in confusion. Yu Haoran can use the soulfire fusion technique to create the skeleton of the nine-colored supreme at the second tribulation immortal realm. This is enough to show that Bone King's comprehension of the realm has reached the third tribulation immortal realm. Thaling explained solemnly while collecting the soulfires of the martial gods and supremes. Facing such a powerful Bone King, the projections of Blue Dragon and the others will definitely be destroyed, and Xingtian Supreme will escape with serious injuries. If we steal the soul-condensing bronze, it's equivalent to cutting off Bone King's hope of transforming. At that time, even if we escape to the endless void, I'm afraid we won't be able to escape from Bone King's pursuit. Thaling, then why are you collecting the soulfires of the martial gods and supremes? Thaling's solemn explanation helped Yu Haoran quickly get rid of the greedy influence of the soul-condensing bronze. However, when he thought of Bone King's nature, he was puzzled by what Thaling was doing. After all, the soulfires of the martial gods and supremes were also treasures that Bone King wanted. The consequences of stealing the soulfires were probably the same as stealing the soul-condensing bronze. Yu Haoran, the transformation of returning to the origin will make Bone King inadvertently neglect some unimportant things. After collecting a total of 13 martial god stage soul flames and 7 martial god stage soul flames, the pagoda spirit withdrew its spiritual sense and explained with a confident smile. Just now, when Bone King used the soulfires to fuse with the nine-colored supreme skeleton, I found that he no longer paid attention to the soulfires in this space. Therefore, as long as we don't steal the soulfires of the half-tribulation immortal realm, he won't notice it. Thaling then turned around and looked straight into Yuhauran's eyes, reminding him with a solemn expression. Yuhauran, through the projections of Blue Dragon and the others, I found that the transformation of the heavenly Tao isn't going smoothly. I have a very strong feeling in my heart. In 1 year or 3 years, the Supremes and Half-Tribulation Immortal Realm experts will all return to the Tianxian continent. Chapter 1981. In the Soulfire Space under White Bone City. Thaling, I got it. In fact, even if Thaling had not reminded him, he had already sensed the abnormality of the rules of heaven through Spirit Destroyer's forbearance. He could even guess the reason for the abnormality of the rules of heaven through the arrogance and dominance of the Blue Dragon's supreme projection. It should have something to do with the conspiracy that the 4 guardian families had been preparing for countless years. Therefore, Yuhauran nodded to show that he understood. He also asked Thaling to control the spacetime Victor to leave the Soulfire space quietly. Then, he slowly approached the ground and prepared to leave White Bone City at any time. Just as the 9-colored giant sword was about to cut the skull of the 9-colored supreme skeleton, Bone King, who was rushing underground, stretched out a crystal-clear bone finger and pointed directly at the 9-colored giant sword. Crack! With a crisp shattering sound, the 9-colored giant sword that had been struck by the bone finger shattered into countless pieces like a mirror and scattered across the city. Puff! Then, the illusory Supreme Primeval, who reappeared in White Bone City, spat out a mouthful of blood. At the same time, his aura fell from the peak of 1 Tribulation Immortal Realm to the early stage of 9th-grade Sovereign. The fact that Bone King was able to shatter the giant 9-colored sword, which was as powerful as a 2 Tribulation Immortal Realm expert, showed how heaven-defying Bone King was. In order to preserve the safety of his projected body and fight for the immortal opportunity in the near future, Illusory Supreme Primeval did not hesitate at all. He rushed into the sky and headed straight for the endless void. Trying to escape? Bone King sneered as he watched Illusory Supreme Primeval running toward the endless void. Then, he stretched out his bone palm and shouted, "White Bone World!" Compared to the Bone World Law Martial skill cast by the 9-colored Sovereign Skeleton, the Bone King's Law Martial skill cast by the Bone King not only had a denser white mist in his palm, but also a stronger suction force. Even though Illusory Supreme Primeval had self-detonated a large number of formation flags and artifacts to resist the suction force, he only lasted for less than 3 seconds before disappearing into the White Bone World in Bone King's palm. Bone King did not put down his bone palm. Instead, he aimed it at Old Man Fu Sheng and Old Man Du Yuan. Unlike Illusory Supreme Primeval's desperate struggle, the two of them were sucked into the White Bone World obediently. What a cunning guy! Bone King carefully sensed Old Man Fu Sheng and Old Man Du Yuan, who had been sucked into the world of bones, and discovered that they were nothing more than phantoms condensed from divine power and principal energy. Bone King was furious, but he also admired their decisiveness in fleeing. After all, they had offended Supreme Primeval, and Primeval. After dealing with Autark Yuanshi, Old Man Fu Sheng, and Old Man Du Yuan, Autark Bone King glanced at Autark Azure Dragon, Autark Vermilion Bird, and Autark Black Tortoise, who were still using the formation to trap the 9-colored Autarka's corpse. Then, he glanced at Xingtian Supreme, who was still trapped by the 9-colored Supreme Skeleton's Law Martial technique. He immediately had a target in his heart. After using his terrifying divine sense to shatter the White Tiger Jade Pendant and completely destroy the 4 Guardians' God-suppressing formation, the suction force formed by the Bone Palm directly enveloped Supreme Blue Dragon, Supreme Vermilion Bird, and Supreme Black Tortoise. Xingtian Supreme, who had lost his helper, could no longer resist the suction force formed by the 9-colored Supreme Skeleton's Bone Palm. He was slowly being forced to get closer to the White Bone World in the palm. Big brother, third sister, hurry up and return to the endless void. No matter what kind of secret technique they used to increase their strength, they couldn't escape the terrifying suction force formed by Bone King's bone palm. Supreme Black Tortoise, who knew that he was going to die today, began to burn his divine power, soul, and blood. Then, he drove his law martial technique to self-destruct while shouting at Supreme Blue Dragon and Supreme Vermilion Bird, who were desperately struggling. Boom! Accompanied by a loud explosion that resounded through the clouds, Supreme Black Tortoise successfully broke the binding of the suction force by self-destructing his law martial technique. At the same time, Supreme Bone King, who was slightly affected by the backlash of the law martial technique, took a few steps back. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Supreme Blue Dragon and Supreme Vermilion Bird quickly rose into the sky and immediately used a special secret technique to cross the barrier of time and space and successfully escaped back to the endless void. As for the Black Tortoise Sovereign, by detonating his projected body and using his power of laws, he had helped the Azure Dragon Sovereign and the Black Tortoise Sovereign successfully escape back into the endless void. This caused the hesitation in the eyes of the Sky Punisher to instantly be replaced with determination. His shoulders shook violently, and his arms directly flew from his shoulders to the nine-colored Supreme's skeleton. At the same time, Xingtian Supreme roared with a ferocious expression. Explode! Boom! Boom! Accompanied by two deafening explosions, the terrifying impact of the self-destruction of the two arms also broke the binding force formed by the law martial technique of the nine-colored Supreme's skeleton. Xingtian Supreme took advantage of this opportunity to use the blood escape technique, which was on par with the law of space martial technique of teleportation, at the cost of overdrawing nearly half of his blood. Before Supreme Bone King and the nine-colored Supreme skeleton could react, he completely disappeared from Bone City. Don't let me see you again in the future. Otherwise, you won't be able to escape from my bone world. Supreme Bone King muttered to himself with a gloomy expression as he watched Xingtian Supreme, Supreme Blue Dragon, and Supreme Vermilion Bird successfully escape from Bone City. Then, he waved his hand to retrieve the soul fire in the skull of the nine-colored Supreme skeleton and sent the skeleton back to the underground soul fire space. Then, he looked down at the ground with his hollow eye sockets and ordered with a calm expression. The enemies who were chasing after you are either dead or have escaped. Now you can be at ease and come out. Oh no. After hearing Supreme Bone King's order, Thaling, who knew that he had been exposed, immediately wanted to use the spacetime victor to escape from the underground. However, at this moment, Yuhauran suddenly reached out and pressed on his shoulder, shaking his head. Thaling, don't panic. In fact, Supreme Bone King hasn't discovered anything. He's just bluffing to scare us. Are you sure? Thaling asked in disbelief. Pagoda Spirit, with Bone King's temperament and strength, if he had already discovered our presence, he would have tried to force us to come out of our own accord, Yuhauran replied with a smile. I'll count to 3. If you don't come out, don't blame me for not showing you any mercy. He waited for close to 30 seconds, but there was still no sign of any unfamiliar auras in Bone City. Bone King's confidence began to waver, and he had no choice but to continue using threats to deceive the people around him. 3. 2. Chapter 1982. Inside White Bone City. 1. As the Bone King shouted out the final number, he slowly raised his bony hand and pointed it at the ground as he spoke in a soft voice. White Bone World. Thaling, Senior Blood Void, don't be rash. Just as Bone King was about to use his bony hand, the Blood Void Beast immediately used the power of space to help Thaling activate the strongest power of the spacetime victor. Yuhauran suddenly stopped it. Yuhauran, if the victor is enveloped by the power of rules, we may not be able to escape even if we try our best. Thaling did not stop activating the spacetime victor. At that time, we may have to detonate our top innate spiritual treasures to escape from Bone King's control. Thaling, Senior Blood Void, look carefully. Yuhauran pointed at Bone King's bony hand and reminded them with a smile. Damn Bone King, I almost fell for his trick. After hearing Yuhauran's reminder, Thaling and the Blood Void Beast looked at Bone King through the spacetime victor. When they saw that the bony hand had not changed at all, Thaling immediately guessed that Bone King was bluffing and could not help but curse in anger. Could I have guessed wrong? Bone King muttered to himself in confusion when he saw that there was no strange aura underground. Then, Bone King speculated on his own cleverness. That human expert must have sneaked out of White Bone City when I was fighting with Blue Dragon and the others. Bone King felt that his speculation was more and more reasonable. After calming down the gray soul fire in his head, he directly jumped into the tunnel that Xingtian Supreme had made to the soul fire space. Then, he used his powerful strength to collapse the tunnel and lay down in the soul-condensing bronze in the soul fire space. He did not immediately escape from the underground of White Bone City. When darkness fell and everything returned to normal, he signaled Thaling to control the spacetime victor to quietly leave the underground. When he was thousands of miles away from White Bone City, he used the method of merging his original body and doppelganger to instantly return to the prince's mansion in Fengrun City. Whether it was facing the attacks of the Supremes in the Endless Void, the pursuit of the projections of the Azure Dragon Sovereign and the others, or the plan of using the Bone King to kill the Azure Dragon Sovereign and the others, the exhaustion on his mind was unimaginable. Therefore, after successfully returning to the Prince Consort's residence, he didn't check on the rewards of this adventure, nor did he use the treasures he obtained to cultivate. Instead, he directly laid on the floor of the cultivation room and completely emptied his mind to sleep. Yuhauran slept until the sun rose the next day. Only then did he wake up energetically. After briefly reviewing the gains and losses of this adventure, he took out the portrait that he had obtained from the second floor of the Blue Dragon family's treasury from the victor. He planned to use the aura of destiny to peek at the shocking secret hidden in the portrait. Thaling and the Blood Void Beast, who had also gone through deep cultivation, also appeared in the cultivation room in peak condition. They then looked at Yuhauran expectantly and looked at the portrait in his hand. Slowly opening the portrait, Yuhauran looked at the blue sky and white clouds depicted in the portrait and took a deep breath. Then, he mobilized the aura of destiny in his heart space and slowly integrated it into the portrait. When the first trace of aura of destiny was integrated into the portrait, the blue sky in the portrait gradually cracked and the white clouds slowly gathered together. When all the aura of destiny was integrated into the portrait, the blue sky, which was already filled with countless cracks, suddenly collapsed. An eye suddenly appeared in the white clouds that had gathered together. It was a single eye that contained happiness, anger, sorrow, joy, sorrow, fear, and countless other complex emotions. When Yuhauran looked at the single eye, a special suction force directly sucked him into the eye. At the same time, the portrait floating in the air suddenly burst into flames. "Violet Spirit, what's going on?" the Blood Void Beast asked anxiously as it pointed at the portrait that had suddenly burst into flames. After all, Yuhauran had been sucked into the portrait by the single eye that had just appeared. "Blood Void Beast, don't worry. This is very likely the second opportunity that Yuhauran has encountered that can change his life and completely change his destiny." In contrast to the Blood Void Beast's anxiousness, Thaling was not at all nervous. Instead, its eyes were filled with excitement and anticipation as it consoled the Blood Void Beast. "Violet Spirit, what do you mean?" Thaling's behavior at this moment made the Blood Void Beast even more confused and puzzled. Thaling, who did not explain the Blood Void Beast's confusion, smiled faintly and used the 5 innate crystals that he had taken out from the victor's body in advance to set up a formation that could convert chaotic spiritual energy. Then, he sat cross-legged in the center of the formation and continued to heal the injuries of his spirit body. The blood-void beast glared at Thaling in dissatisfaction and frustration. Then, it also took out innate crystals and God's vein to heal its heavy injuries. This is... Looking at the people coming and going around him, and the tall city walls hundreds of meters away, Yuhauran found himself in an ordinary city for no reason. Without any hesitation, the martial artist's body told him to use his divine sense to carefully inspect the overall layout of the city, as well as the specific cultivation levels and distribution of the powerful martial artists in the city. However, he was surprised to find that not only was he unable to use his divine sense, but even the space in his sea of consciousness and the Dantian space in his abdomen had disappeared. The disappearance of the space in his sea of consciousness and Dantian meant that the divine power and soul power that he had painstakingly cultivated had completely disappeared. This meant that he was now an ordinary person without any cultivation. Fortunately, his experience in the witch god's space allowed him to quickly calm down. He followed the people on the streets and began to re-evaluate the city that had caused him to lose all his cultivation. After passing through 3 wide streets and crossing more than half of the city, Yuhauran finally sat on a chair near the window of a tavern. He looked at a pot of green wine in front of him and revealed a thoughtful expression. After his experience of crossing more than half of the city, he found that although he had lost his godly strength, there was not a single martial artist in the city who had cultivated before. At the same time, the shops that were opened on the 3 streets made him realize that this city was filled with businesses that were closely related to life. For example, there were cloth shops, tailors, restaurants, taverns, and horse carriages that were needed for food, shelter, and transportation. For example, there were medical centers and funeral clothes shops that were needed for birth, old age, sickness, and death. At the same time, there were also shops that he had never heard of, such as repair shops, seed shops, livestock shops, emotional relaxation shops, and other strange shops. Clang 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 clang. Clang 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 clang. Clang clang clang. Chapter 1983. Through the open window, Yuhauran saw 2 middle-aged men dressed in bailiff uniforms on the east side of the street. One was striking a gong, while the other was beating a drum. "Make way, all of you make way!" Behind the 2 constables, there was an elite soldier in armor who held an imperial edict in his hands. At the same time, on the west side of the street, a group of 10-some young masters dressed in silk robes and holding folding fans looked at the approaching bailiffs and armored elite soldiers with nervous and eager eyes. "Which one of you is called Chui Minliang?" The bailiff quickly walked up to the group of young masters and asked with a fawning smile. "This one is called Chui Minliang." Just as the sound of the constable's voice faded away, among the dozen or so young masters, only one young man dressed in old sackcloth walked out from the crowd with an excited expression. "Congratulations, young Master Chui. Congratulations, young Master Chui. You have taken first place in this year's court examination." The fawning smile was immediately replaced by a fawning smile. The middle-aged bailiff handed the instrument in his hand to his companion and then took out a purple gold letter from his sleeve and respectfully presented it to Chui Minliang. Chui Minliang's hands trembled as he took the purple gold letter and slowly opened it. When he saw the contents of the letter, tears streamed down his face as he raised his head to the sky and shouted, "Father, Mother, your child is the top scorer." Chui Minliang received the edict. As Chui Minliang was shouting to the heavens, the armored elite soldier walked past the 2 bailiffs and unfurled the edict as he announced the edict to Chui Minliang. Although the contents of the edict were simple, the commotion it caused the entire street to fall silent. Prince Consort. The content of the edict was that the Emperor of the Datong Empire had betrothed his most beloved Princess Iju to Chui Minliang. Chui Minliang, who seemed to have come from a humble background and was bestowed the title of Prince Consort, had completely transformed his life in a matter of minutes. Whether it was Chui Minliang himself or the people on the street, all of them had different reactions to this sudden transformation. Chui Minliang seemed to be the only one who was truly happy. After all, he was the only beneficiary. Envy and jealousy occupied the majority. After all, this kind of beautiful thing of flying up the branch and becoming a phoenix was the dream of most people present. There were also many people who were filled with hatred, especially the young masters standing behind Chui Minliang. While they were congratulating him hypocritically, the hatred in their eyes made them want to take a knife and kill him. Joy, anger, sorrow, joy, and hatred. Looking at the different reactions of the people on the street, Yu Haoran, who originally had the mentality of watching a show, gradually immersed himself in the feelings and understanding of the different emotional reactions. At the same time, an ethereal aura gradually rose from his body. When Chui Minliang finally calmed down and received the imperial edict from the armored soldier, the scene in front of him suddenly changed. The ordinary city was replaced by a luxurious mansion. The noisy tavern was replaced by a warm and romantic bridal room with a big red happiness character pasted on it. Looking at the room illuminated by the red candles, looking at the motionless bride sitting on the phoenix bed, Yu Haoran, who was sitting next to the bride, suddenly had a trace of vitality in his ethereal aura. Opening the bride's red veil and blowing out the red candles, Chui Minliang, who was both the top scholar and the prince consort, had truly reached the peak of his life. The scene changed. Although the thin Chui Minliang was wearing brocade clothes, the worry between his eyebrows showed that his life after the wedding was not going well. The princess is not free today. Prince consort, please come another day. A middle-aged nanny in her 40s did not hide the contempt in her eyes as she chased him away. In response, although a trace of anger flashed in Chui Minliang's eyes, in the end, he sighed and turned to leave. Although his mind was in a state of enlightenment, Yu Haoran still subconsciously glanced at the prince's mansion. At this moment, the spiritual sense that had disappeared suddenly returned. Through the wall and the courtyard, he saw the beautiful princess lying happily in the arms of a handsome young man with an extraordinary temperament. The young man looked at the princess's slightly protruding abdomen, his eyes showing tenderness like water. The spiritual sense that could be mobilized suddenly disappeared. Yu Haoran found himself in a slightly shabby inn and saw Chui Minliang kneeling in front of a pair of memorial tablets in the room of the inn. Yu Haoran didn't need to listen to Chui Minliang's muttering. The entire process of the incident suddenly appeared in his mind. A 7th-rank editor of the Literary Academy, 1 month's salary was barely enough to support himself, and he also had to save on clothes and diet to please the people in the prince's mansion. Through this, he could see the princess and spend a night with the princess. In this case, he could not help his parents who painstakingly raised him and lived in a distant mountain village. In the end, his parents starved to death. Bang! 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 Holding a blood-stained letter in his hand, Chui Minliang kowtowed 9 times in front of a pair of memorial tablets. His eyes showed a crazy killing intent. He got up and took out a yellowed book from under the pillow and carefully hid it in his chest. Then he turned and left the inn and went straight to the antique shop not far from the inn. He used the precious book stolen from the Literary Academy of the Imperial Palace to exchange for 3,000 taels of silver. 2,000 taels of silver were used to bury his dead parents, and the remaining 1,000 taels were used to bribe several guards in the prince's mansion. Then he quietly sneaked into the princess's room. Seeing the princess sleeping on the bed and the handsome young man lying next to the princess, Chui Minliang's heart suddenly ignited endless anger. He used a chair to block the door and quietly walked to the bed. Then he raised the sharp knife in his hand and directly inserted it into the young man's heart. "You!" The great pain from the heart made the sleeping young man suddenly open his eyes. Feeling the rapid loss of life, looking at the ferocious Chui Minliang, the young man's eyes showed endless regret. After all, with his family background and appearance, he still had dozens of years of glory and wealth, and countless beautiful women waiting for his favor. Now, because of a moment of greed, he finally ended up dying young. How could this not make him regret? He suddenly pulled out the sharp knife and sprayed a lot of blood directly on the princess's face. This also made the princess gradually wake up. When she saw her husband standing in front of the bed holding the sharp knife, she turned her head and looked at the dead young man. Her heart suddenly surged with horror and sadness, and she could not help but scream. Chapter 1984. He grabbed the princess's long hair and dragged her to the memorial tablet on the table. Then, he pressed her head down and forced her to kowtow 9 times to her parents' memorial tablet. Then, he stabbed the sharp knife in his hand into the princess' heart. "Your Highness, I was the top scorer in the imperial examination. When His Majesty granted me your hand in marriage, I thought I was the happiest person in the world." Cui Minliang let the sharp knife stab into the princess' heart. Then, he held her in his arms and fell to the ground. His eyes were filled with tenderness as he muttered to himself, "I was born poor and did not have much ambition. I only hoped to show filial piety to my aged parent. I only longed to love someone who would grow old with me. I only hoped that my children would have a bright future. But my hopes, my desires, and my extravagant hopes were all destroyed by you." Cui Minliang hugged the princess tightly as he looked at her eyes gradually blurring. Her life was about to come to an end. Tears flowed from his eyes as he looked at her with anticipation. "Iju, don't be afraid. I will come to find you soon. At that time, you and I will reunite as husband and wife in the underworld and show filial piety to our parent." Just as the guards of the princess mansion forced the door open, Cui Minliang pulled out the sharp knife and stabbed it into his heart. Then, he and Princess Iju lay in a pool of blood. "Iju, wait for me." The moment Cui Minliang committed suicide, Yu Haoran suddenly woke up from his state of enlightenment and found himself back in the cultivation room of the prince's mansion. "Yu Haoran, how was it?" Yu Haoran's sudden appearance in the cultivation room immediately alarmed Thaling and the blood void beast, who were cultivating. After quickly dispelling the formation that converted the chaotic spiritual energy, Thaling asked with endless expectations. "Sigh." Faced with Thaling's questioning, Yu Haoran sighed softly and sighed with a complicated expression. "Love comes and goes. Kindness and hatred come together. 7 emotions and 6 desires. The Tao of trapping fruit is really unfathomable." After sighing, he directly took out a second-grade upper-grade spiritual vein that he had obtained from the first floor of the Blue Dragon family's treasury. Then, he slowly closed his eyes and began to cultivate and comprehend. "Zi-Ling, what did Yu Haoran mean by what he said just now? What kind of earth-shattering secret is hidden in the portrait?" The blood void beast asked impatiently, unable to understand what Yu Haoran had just said. "Sure enough, just as I expected, there really is such a treasure hidden in the portrait." Ignoring the blood foe beast's question, the emotional Thaling paced back and forth in the training room as he muttered to himself excitedly. "Violet Spirit, if you don't give me a detailed explanation, don't blame me, Shuesu, for falling out with you." After being looked down upon by Thaling twice in a row, the blood void beast was extremely frustrated and displeased. In order to find out the secret hidden in the portrait as soon as possible, and also to understand why Yu Haoran sighed inexplicably just now, he did not hesitate to use violence to threaten Thaling. "Shuesu, this portrait in the 2nd floor of the Blue Dragon family's treasury doesn't hide any earth-shattering secret, but the law of entrapment, which has disappeared for countless years." After taking a deep breath and trying to calm himself down, Thaling began to explain to the blood void beast in detail. Yu Haoran sighed just now because he has found the opportunity to comprehend the law of entrapment. "Sizzle!" the blood void beast asked in disbelief, as it sucked in a breath of cold air. Ziling, is it the law of entrapment, which is said to be able to suppress the law of fate? What do you think? Facing the blood-void beast's questioning, Thaling replied with dissatisfaction. Then, he flashed back into Yuhauran's body in the sea of consciousness. Then, he continued to use the chaos spiritual chi converted from the primordial crystals to speed up the recovery of his body victor and godly soul. At the same time, he recalled all the memory fragments of the previous device spirit to search for the comprehension to break through to the half-tribulation immortal realm. How is this possible? The blood-void beast didn't pay attention to Thaling's look of disdain and murmured to itself in shock. The Destiny's child who controls the Destiny steel can comprehend the law of entrapment, which can suppress the law of fate. Did I hear it wrong, or has this world gone completely crazy? The law of entrapment was ranked 5th among the thousands of laws. Like the law of space, it couldn't be directly comprehended and controlled. One had to comprehend 13 auxiliary laws in advance. The 13 auxiliary powers of laws represented the 7 emotions of a living being, namely joy, anger, sorrow, fear, love, disgust, and desire, as well as the 6 senses of the physical body, namely sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, and will. Chui Minoyang's ups and downs in the portrait allowed Yuhauran to clearly see and experience the 7 emotions of a living creature. It also allowed him to comprehend the 7 auxiliary laws in less than 1 day and 1 night. As for the 6 types of power of law that his physical body could sense, the law of sight, the law of hearing, the law of touch, and the law of will, he successfully comprehended them in the following day. The only thing he didn't have was the comprehension of the law of smell and the law of taste. However, the comprehension of the auxiliary laws required a certain amount of luck most of the time. Not only would hard work not succeed, but it would also waste a lot of time. Therefore, Yuhauran stopped comprehending the remaining 2 laws and stood up to leave the cultivation room. He then used his divine telekinesis to summon everyone to the pavilion in the courtyard for a chat. Qin Lingfei and the Sword Without Trace, who had just returned from their adventure, had successfully reached Emperor Wu rank 9. After that, he only needed to cultivate calmly for a period of time to raise his cultivation to peak 9th grade Martial Emperor. Then, with the help of the ginseng fruit and a few divine pills that could assist in breaking through, he would be able to directly break through to the immortal martial god realm. Yunxiang, Fang Man, and Xiang Muling also successfully completed their plan to break through to the next realm. As for Qing Feng, Yusiki, Wu Jingjun, Lu Yuan, Palace, and Long-Armed Ape, they used this period of time to completely consolidate and adapt to their new realms. They were also able to unleash the strength of their peak realms. Looking at the prince's mansion that was becoming more and more powerful, Yuhauran was deeply gratified and satisfied. "Prince Consort, why did you suddenly call us here?" Qin Lingfei directly pulled the Sword Without Trace to Yuhauran's side, then held one hand each and asked, "We're moving." Yuhauran smiled and told them his plan while holding Qin Lingfei and the Sword Without Trace's hands as they walked into the pavilion. "Where are we moving to?" Qin Lingfei quickly asked. "The southern region, the 100 Qi Gate." When they heard that Yuhauran planned to move the prince's mansion to the 100 Qi Gate in the southern region, Yusiki, the Sword Without Trace, and Wu Jingjuan's reactions were very calm. After all, they were already used to the environment of the 100 Qi Gate. Chapter 1985. In the Wind Pavilion of the Prince's Mansion. Junior brother Yu, why did you suddenly decide to move? Why did you choose the location of your new home in the remote 100 Feet Gate? In the entire Prince's Mansion, the only people who were qualified to question Yuhauran's decision were Qing Feng, who had a cooperative relationship with him, and Lu Yuan, who was like a brother to him. Lu Yuan was a pure swordsman and a warrior who was obsessed with martial arts cultivation. Nearly 99% of his attention was on cultivation. Even if he felt that Yu Haoran's decision was wrong, he would neither oppose it nor question it in person. Therefore, in the face of Yu Haoran's sudden decision to move the prince's mansion to the southern 100 Gate in the southern region, Qing Feng, who did not understand the reason, immediately questioned it. Opportunity! Opportunity! Letting go of Qin Lingfei's and the sword without Trace's hands, Yu Haoran sat on the stone chair that Wu Jingjun had taken the initiative to give up, and then replied with a chuckle. Junior brother Yu, what opportunities and opportunities are there in the southern 100 Gate? Qing Feng continued to ask with a slight frown. Senior brother Qing Feng, with the arrival of the ancient demon tribe and the ancient god and devil tribe, the entire southern region can be said to be the most dangerous place in the Tianxian continent. However, for everyone in the prince's mansion, it is the safest place. In the face of Qing Feng's questioning, Yu Haoran exuded a strong sense of confidence as he explained. Moreover, as the primordial demon clan, the primordial nether clan, and the primordial celestial demon clan are about to begin their conquest and expansion, the southern region is an excellent training ground for all of you and the 100,000 elite soldiers in the north. That's true. When Yu Haoran gave the reason for moving to the 100 Gate, Qing Feng did not object and nodded in agreement. After all, when Yu Haoran had the strength of a supreme with the help of a secret technique, he had forced the ancient demon tribe, the ancient god and devil tribe, and the Carefree Valley to make a vow that they would never invade the area within 1,000 miles of the 100 Gate. If that was the case, it would indeed give them an excellent training ground where they could enter and retreat to rest and recuperate. Senior brother Qing Feng, whether it was the epiphany in the Green Lake Mountains or the breakthrough in the Blue Dragon's family treasury, I have a very strong feeling in my heart. Putting the smile on his face, Yu Haoran's sects wish to be Qing Feng's sect. I feel that the mountain range where my sect is located is the place where I, Yu Haoran, officially started my martial path. At the same time, it also holds the opportunity to allow my martial path to reach the peak. Junior brother Yu, when do you plan to move to the 100 Gate? Moving to the southern region's 100 Gate was actually related to Yu Haoran's opportunity to break through to the martial god and supremacy realms. After hearing Yu Haoran's solemn explanation, Qing Feng immediately extinguished the thought of continuing to question him. Yu Haoran turned his head and looked in the direction of the southern region. His eyes were filled with endless anticipation as he spoke. We'll set off at 1:15 in the morning tomorrow. All right, then let's go and prepare in advance. Although they had not occupied Fengrun City for a long time, everyone treated it as their new home. They had invested a lot of effort and energy into it, so they needed a certain amount of time to prepare and bid farewell. Therefore, Qing Feng immediately stood up and bid farewell. At the same time, Lu Yuan, Palace, and the others also stood up and bid farewell. After Qing Feng and the others left the pavilion, only Qin Lingfei and the sword without trace were left. Prince Consort, do you think we'll have a chance to return to Xianying City in the future? Qin Lingfei hugged Yu Haoran's neck from behind and buried her head in his long hair. Her eyes were filled with anticipation as she asked. Yes. Yu Haoran replied with certainty as he nodded. Furthermore, I believe that it won't be long before we return to Xianying City. At this point, Yu Haoran's gaze turned to the central region. His eyes were also filled with anticipation. In the central region, the Bai clan was located in the gloomy Marsh Mountain range. Emperor Qin stood alone on the peak of a mountain that was about 3,650 meters tall. He looked in the direction of the southern region. His deep eyes were also filled with anticipation and longing. Emperor Qin, if you want to reach the martial god realm in a month's time, you must seize the opportunity to attack the Zhou clan's base. Then, use the secret technique I taught you to seal and devour those martial gods who have yet to awaken from their injuries. Just as Emperor Qin's thoughts returned to Xianying City in the southern region, Uluron's voice suddenly rang out in his sea of consciousness. Demon Lord, apart from me who can borrow the power of your remnant soul to temporarily possess the strength of the martial god realm in the army in the central region, the remaining commanders and generals are no match for the awakened martial gods of the Zhou clan. After withdrawing his gaze from the southern region, Emperor Qin frowned as he reminded and questioned Uluoran. Furthermore, according to the spies I've arranged in the Zhou clan, the number of martial gods who have awakened in the past 2 months has reached 7. What's the difference between attacking the Zhou clan's base rashly at this time and seeking death? That's right. In the face of Emperor Qin's doubts, Uluoran did not object and nodded in agreement. With the strength of the army in the central region, facing 7 immortal martial gods, the final result will definitely be complete annihilation. But immediately after, his tone changed as he reminded Uluoran. But what if you can get help to deal with the 7 martial gods? Haha. In the face of Uluoran's remnant soul's reminder, Emperor Qin chuckled self-deprecatingly before he spoke in a helpless tone. Demon Lord, I, Emperor Qin, only have 10,000 people in the world. I have neither the qualifications nor the ability, time, and capital to make friends with the experts of the top forces. Now, which martial god realm divine expert is willing to risk his life to help us deal with the 7 martial gods of the Zhou clan? There is. Ignoring Emperor Qin's helpless self-deprecation, Uluoran spoke in a decisive tone. Not only does this person have the powerful strength to attack the Zhou clan alone, but he also won't pose any threat to you. Who? Emperor Qin immediately asked excitedly. His Majesty's most valued son-in-law, and also the only son-in-law of Emperor Qin, Yu Haoran. Uluoran replied. Haoran. After hearing the candidate given by Uluoran's remnant soul, Emperor Qin couldn't help but frown. Ever since he obtained the forbidden secret method that could rapidly increase his cultivation and strength by devouring the opponent's flesh and blood essence and comprehension, most of his attention was focused on fighting and capturing opponents alive. It had been a long time since he paid attention to Yu Haoran's news. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.